My name is Marisa Garcia. I am 32 years old, and on a Tuesday evening in a crowded steakhouse, my father looked me in the eye and laughed at the idea of me going on a family vacation, a vacation I had paid for. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled his life within 72 hours, I want to welcome you to Grape Vengeance. If you have ever been the family bank, the one they use but never respect, you are in the right place. Tell me your age and where you are watching from in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you to that dinner table in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I work as a financial compliance manager. My job is tracking money, finding irregularities, and enforcing rules. In my family, my role was just paying the bills. My father, Victor, ran a struggling hardware store. My mother, Sylvia, managed the household. My younger sister, Jolene, managed to live entirely on my paycheck. For years, I funded the holidays, the emergency car repairs, the property taxes. I poured my annual bonuses into a joint family savings account. They called it a family emergency fund. I called it my duty. That Tuesday, we sat at a corner table at an upscale restaurant. I booked it to celebrate. For 6 months, I had been arranging a luxury trip to Hawaii for the four of us. Ocean view suites, first-class tickets. I took on extra compliance audits to cover the deposits. Over the appetizers, my parents doted on Jolene. She showed off her new engagement ring, a diamond her fiancé Derek had bought, though I had quietly paid her rent so she could save for the wedding. I took a sip of ice water and set my glass down. I looked at my father. I finalized the Hawaii itinerary today, I said. I cannot wait for our vacation. Victor stopped cutting his ribeye. He looked up at me. Then he let out a sharp, genuine laugh. He slapped his hand on the mahogany table, making the silverware rattle. "What are you talking about?" he asked, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "That trip is only for family. You are not coming." The clatter of plates around us seemed to fade. I looked at Jolene. She hid a smirk behind her wine glass. I looked at Sylvia. My mother stared intently at her mashed potatoes, offering no defense. They had planned this. They let me fund the trip, let me build the itinerary, and agreed behind my back to leave me home. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but my compliance training took over. In my line of work, you do not react to fraud. You freeze the assets. I did not cry. I reached into my purse and pulled out 3 $20 bills. I placed the cash on the table to cover the exact cost of my steak and my water. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out of the restaurant. I did not look back when my father called my name. The drive to my townhouse took 20 minutes. By the time I parked my car, the hurt had hardened into cold resolve. I walked inside, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop. I logged into the banking portal. The joint family savings account held exactly $12,000. Every cent of it came from my paychecks. With 3 precise clicks, I transferred the entire balance into a private account under my name only. I navigated to the joint debit card, the one my father carried in his wallet, and I canceled it. Then I set up a custom alert. The next time anyone tried to run that card, the terminal would decline and it would trigger an automated text message to my father's phone. I typed the memo myself. Pay without me. I closed my laptop. The final travel agency deposit was due in exactly 3 days. My family thought they had secured a free luxury vacation. They had no idea they were walking straight into a financial trap. I woke up Wednesday morning to a phone buzzing so aggressively it nearly rattled right off my nightstand. The Garcia family group chat was completely lit up. Jolene was sending links to beachfront cabanas. She asked the group if she should book the swim-up bar package or the private catamaran sunset tour. My father replied instantly with a thumbs up and a sunglasses emoji. My mother reminded Jolene to pack her expensive imported sunscreen because the island sun was unforgiving. I sat on the edge of my bed, bare feet on the hardwood floor, and watched the messages scroll past. They were gleefully planning how to spend my money on a trip they had explicitly banned me from taking. I did not type a single letter in response. I set the device face down on my mattress. My silence was not submission. It was a tightly coiled spring. People often ask how a person lets themselves be used for so long. You do not volunteer to become a human bank account. You are groomed for it from birth. I thought back to my childhood, searching for the exact moment I became a transaction. I remembered my 8th grade piano recital. I practiced a complex Beethoven sonata for 6 grueling months. When I walked onto the auditorium stage and looked out at the 3rd row, I saw 2 empty folding chairs. My parents had rushed across town to attend Jolene's Junior Miss Pageant dress fitting. They claimed it was a tailoring emergency. I played the sonata perfectly to a room full of polite strangers. Years later, my college graduation dinner lasted exactly 40 minutes. My parents kept checking their watches because Jolene needed a ride to a boutique mall sale before the doors locked. They treated my major life milestones like annoying traffic delays on the highway to Jolene's happiness. I built a demanding career in financial compliance because I truly believed financial success would finally earn their respect. I studied late. I passed certifications. I climbed the corporate ladder. I was completely wrong. They did not respect my work ethic or my intelligence. They only respected my routing number. I was the family utility closet. You only open that door when a pipe bursts, the basement floods, and you urgently need a wrench to fix your own mess. Wednesday night, I decided to finally clean out the closet. I made a strong pot of black coffee and opened my work laptop at my kitchen island. I am a compliance manager. My actual job is to track fraudulent corporate transactions, identify misuse of funds, and enforce strict boundaries to protect assets. I simply decided to apply my professional expertise to my own bloodline. I started with the cell phone plan. I was the primary account holder. For 6 years, I paid the unlimited data bills for my father, my mother, and my sister because they convinced me group plans were practical. I navigated to the administrative user dashboard. I located Victor Garcia. I clicked Remove Line. I found Sylvia Garcia. I clicked Remove Line. I selected Jolene Garcia. I clicked Remove Line. I confirmed the final changes. Their expensive smartphones would turn into useless bricks the second they stepped away from a wireless internet connection. Next, I pulled up the auto insurance portal. I had been covering the premium policies on my father's heavy-duty truck and Jolene's leased luxury sports car. My father constantly claimed his hardware business cash flow was too unpredictable to handle monthly overhead. I deleted my payment methods from the system. I drafted an automated cancellation notice to take effect at midnight. I moved methodically to the streaming services, the premium cable television packages, the grocery delivery subscriptions, and the cloud storage accounts. I changed every single password. I logged out every remote device. I was systematically unplugging the financial life support, keeping the Garcia family comfortable. I did not feel angry while typing. I felt the crisp, absolute peace of a perfectly balanced ledger. Every click of my mouse severed a heavy chain I had dragged around for over a decade. Thursday morning arrived bright and clear. I drove to my firm, parked in my assigned garage spot, and took the elevator up to my floor. Today was the absolute deadline for the Hawaii travel agency deposit. $8,000 was due by noon to secure those premium ocean view suites Jolene was bragging about. I knew exactly how my father operated. Victor Garcia deeply loved the performance of wealth. He would never pay a bill of that massive size quietly online. He preferred an audience. He would walk into the luxury travel agency downtown, accept their complimentary sparkling water, sit in a plush leather chair, and hand over a premium debit card to feel important. He intended to hand over my joint debit card. I sat at my desk and arranged my monitors. On the left screen, I pulled up a quarterly audit report for a corporate client. On the right screen, I logged directly into my personal banking portal. I locked my office door. I watched the digital clock in the bottom right corner of my monitor. 11:45. 11:50. My heart maintained a steady, entirely even rhythm. I was not afraid of the fallout. I was simply waiting for the math to correct itself. In my family, love was always treated as a strict budget, and I had just permanently defunded their favorite projects. 11:58. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I pictured my father sitting across from a polished travel agent. I pictured my mother beside him, likely boasting about the private catamaran tour they planned to take. I imagined Jolene waiting at home, totally unaware her cell phone data was already severed. 12 noon. The banking portal on my right monitor refreshed automatically. A red alert banner flashed across the top of the screen. A transaction attempt had been logged in real time. The merchant identifier listed was Island Paradise Luxury Travel. The amount requested was exactly $8,000. I watched the banking system process the request. It hit the locked account. It hit the absolute zero balance. The screen updated with a bold, beautiful word: declined. But the bank did not just decline the charge. My custom security alert engaged perfectly. The system instantly dispatched an automated text message straight to my father's phone explaining the rejection. The memo I had typed Tuesday night delivered itself. Pay without me. Less than 10 seconds later, my cell phone began to vibrate violently against the glass surface of my desk. The screen lit up bright. The caller ID displayed my father's name. The trap had snapped entirely shut, and the man who laughed at me over a steak dinner was about to demand I fix his broken reality. The phone vibrated across my glass desk. I watched the screen glow with my father's name. I let it buzz 4 times. I wanted him to steep in the awkwardness of the moment. I wanted him to feel the eyes of the travel agent on him. I wanted the silence to stretch until the polished facade he wore in public began to crack. I picked up on the 5th ring. "Fix this," Victor hissed into the receiver. He kept his volume suppressed, a tight, forced whisper, but the fury radiated through the speaker. Behind his voice, I heard the unmistakable quiet of a high-end office. Soft instrumental music played faintly. Someone typed on a quiet keyboard. A chair squeaked. I could picture the scene perfectly. My father sitting in a plush leather chair, wearing his best golf shirt, trying to maintain an air of casual wealth, while a travel agent stared at a screen showing a rejected payment. "Fix what I asked." My tone matched the temperature of the room around me. Cool. Regulated. The bank locked the card he snapped. It declined twice. "The agent is sitting right here waiting for the deposit. Call customer service and clear the fraud hold." He genuinely believed a computer algorithm caused the problem. It never occurred to him that the human being he humiliated at dinner possessed the spine to cut off his funding. In his mind, I was still the obedient ledger, the silent backer. "There is no fraud hold," I said, keeping my breathing even. "Open your mobile app, look at the account." I heard the rustle of clothing, the faint tapping of a screen. A few seconds ticked by. The soft jazz in the background seemed to swell. Then the sharp intake of breath. He saw the zero balance. He saw the custom memo. "Pay without me." "What is this?" His whisper vanished. His voice rose, shattering the polite quiet of the travel agency. "Where is the money, Marissa?" "I moved it," I replied. "You said the vacation was for family only." "I agree. The trip belongs to you, Sylvia and Jolene. The funding belongs to me. You can figure out how to pay for your own suites. Put the funds back right now." He was no longer asking. He was commanding, using the exact tone he used when I was 10 years old and forgot to sweep the garage. "You do not humiliate me in public. You do not disrespect your parents." "You disrespected me over a steak dinner on Tuesday," I reminded him. "I am just balancing the ledger." "You spoiled brat," he spat. The travel agent must have flinched because I heard my father mutter a brief apology to someone nearby before returning his full rage to me. "I raised you. I put a roof over your head. If you do not transfer that money back in the next 5 minutes, I will drive to your townhouse and take your car. I will take the keys and sell it to cover what you owe this family." He wanted to use my vehicle as collateral for a vacation I was not allowed to attend. The sheer audacity of the threat hung in the air. "My car is in my name," I said. "If you set foot on my driveway, I will call the police." "You would not dare." "Try it." I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button. The call disconnected. I placed the device back on my desk. My hands did not shake. My heart maintained a steady, regular beat. I had expected to feel guilt. Society conditions daughters to carry the burden for every fractured relationship in a household. Instead, I felt a profound, cleansing relief. But as the quiet settled over my office, my professional instincts began to sort through the pieces of the conversation. I am a financial compliance manager. I look for the story hidden behind the numbers, and the math here did not add up. My father owned Garcia Hardware. He had run the business for 3 decades. Growing up, the store was a source of immense pride. It smelled of cut lumber, brass fittings, and success. A man who owns a retail business, even a struggling one, should possess a corporate credit card. He should have a line of credit. He should have personal savings to fall back on. Why was he attempting to charge an $8,000 luxury vacation deposit to a joint account funded solely by my paycheck? Why the raw panic? Why the threat to steal my car over a missed trip? A minor disagreement over a canceled flight was peeling back the paint on a much larger structural failure. I thought about the clues I had ignored over the past year. During the holidays, my father complained about suppliers changing their payment terms. He claimed his vendors were being unreasonable and demanding cash up front. In February, he asked me to review a confusing tax notice, brushing it off as a bureaucratic error. He constantly praised Jolene's extravagant lifestyle, but never offered to pay for her dinners, letting me silently pick up the check every single time. He was not experiencing a temporary cash flow issue. He was broke. Garcia Hardware was failing. The inventory was not moving. The vendors were not being unreasonable. They were demanding payment on overdue invoices. My joint savings account had not just been a vacation fund. It had been his secret safety net, the only liquid cash keeping his head above water. Without my paycheck, the facade of the successful patriarch crumbled into dust. The Hawaii trip was a cover story. He needed to prove to his friends, to his country club, and to Jolene's wealthy fiancé that the Garcia family still possessed wealth. He needed to project success to hide his insolvency. And I had just kicked the crutch away. My phone chimed. A single text message glowed on the screen. It was from Victor. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I stared at the text. It was not a message from an angry parent sending a child to their room. It read like a threat from a desperate man cornered by his own failures. My father felt entitled to my existence. He viewed my income, my assets, and my credit as extensions of his own property. If he was willing to threaten my car over a vacation deposit, what else had he already done? A chill traveled down my spine, the kind of cold that warns you the ground beneath your feet is hollow. In compliance work, when you spot a single irregular transaction, you do not stop investigating. You pull the entire file. You trace the web. If a person feels entitled to your cash, they rarely stop at just the cash. They use your name. They use your identity. I opened a new tab on my browser. I bypassed my standard banking portal and navigated directly to the primary credit bureau databases. I had a premium monitoring service, one I required for my professional clearances, but I usually only checked the top-line score. Now I needed the raw data. I needed to see every footprint attached to my Social Security number. I entered my credentials. I answered the security questions. I hit submit. I sat back and watched the loading icon spin. My father's threat echoed in my mind. He thought I made a mistake. He was about to learn that my only mistake had been trusting him in the first place. The screen refreshed, populating years of financial history line by line. I scrolled past my mortgage, my student loans, my clean credit cards. I was hunting for anomalies, praying I would not find any. The silence in my office felt heavier now, thick with anticipation. My eyes scanned the columns. Payment history, open dates, balances. Everything looked normal until I reached the section detailing revolving credit and active leases. Then my eyes caught a sequence of numbers that did not belong to me. A trade line I had never opened. An address I had never lived at. a debt I had never authorized. The puzzle pieces clicked into a horrifying new shape. The canceled vacation was just a minor pebble rolling down a hill. The avalanche had already started falling. The avalanche began with a single line of text on my credit report. I sat in my quiet office and stared at the glowing monitor. My eyes traced the letters and numbers, trying to force them to make sense. It was an active trade line opened 24 months ago. The creditor was a high-end property management firm located in downtown Grand Rapids. The account type was listed as a primary guarantor lease obligation. The current balance of liability was over $40,000. I had never signed a lease with that company. I owned my townhouse. I had lived in the same zip code for 4 years. But the address attached to this specific debt was one I recognized instantly. It was a luxury high-rise apartment complex overlooking the Grand River. It was the exact unit my sister Jolene had moved into 2 years ago. The room seemed to tilt. The ambient hum of my office HVAC unit faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I closed my eyes and gripped the edge of my glass desk. A memory flashed through my mind with sickening clarity. 2 years ago, I had attended Jolene's housewarming party. I remembered walking into her sprawling loft, admiring the floor-to-ceiling windows and the granite countertops. I had brought her an expensive espresso machine as a gift. I had stood in her kitchen drinking champagne, listening to her brag to her friends about how her fiancé, Derek, had helped her secure the premium unit. She had lied to my face. Derek had not secured that apartment. My credit score had secured it. My parents had not just drained my cash to fund their lifestyle. They had stolen my identity to finance my sister's luxury living. In my profession, panic is a liability. When a compliance manager discovers a fraudulent transaction, they do not scream. They do not throw things. They secure the evidence. I forced my breathing to slow down. I opened a new, secure tab on my browser and navigated to the property management company's online resident portal. Using the account number listed on my credit report and my own Social Security number, I bypassed their basic security protocols and requested a digital copy of the original lease agreement. The PDF downloaded to my desktop. I opened it and scrolled straight to the final page. There, sitting stark and black against the digital paper, was my name. The signature was a clumsy forgery. The loop of EM was too rigid. The slant of the letters was entirely wrong. It looked like my father's heavy-handed writing, trying desperately to mimic my fluid cursive. But my father was not a criminal mastermind. He was a desperate man who owned a failing hardware store. He had made a fatal error. Below the forged signature sat a digital notary stamp verifying that I had supposedly presented my state identification and signed the document in person. The stamp belonged to a notary named Arthur Vance. I recognized the name. Arthur Vance was my father's former business partner, a man who had retired and moved to Florida 3 years ago. I pulled up the Michigan State Notary Registry database and typed in Arthur Vance's commission number. The search results loaded instantly. His commission had expired 4 years ago. The stamp was a fake. My father had used an expired, fraudulent notary seal to legitimize a forged legal document. This was no longer a family dispute over a canceled vacation. This was identity theft, wire fraud, and uttering a forged instrument. These were state felonies. Before I could process the sheer weight of what this meant for my family, my cell phone lit up on my desk. A text message banner dropped down from the top of the screen. It was from my Aunt Clara. "How could you do this to your own mother? You need help, Marissa." I frowned. Aunt Clara lived in Detroit and rarely spoke to my parents. 10 seconds later, another message arrived, this time from my cousin Mark. "Canceling their trip is one thing, but stealing their savings? You are sick." My phone began to chime continuously. Notifications poured in from aunts, uncles, and distant cousins. The tone of every single message was identical. They were furious, disgusted, and deeply concerned for my mental health. I unlocked my phone and opened Facebook. I did not have to scroll far. At the very top of my feed was a live video broadcast that my mother Sylvia had posted 20 minutes ago. I tapped the video. Sylvia sat on her living room couch. She wore an old, oversized sweater. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. She looked like a woman who had been weeping for days. She stared directly into the camera lens, her lower lip trembling with practiced precision. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Sylvia said, her voice cracking perfectly on the last word. "But our family is in crisis. My oldest daughter, Marissa, has suffered some kind of mental break. We have been trying to get her help for months. Today, out of nowhere, she drained our entire family emergency savings account. She canceled a trip we had been saving for all year. She left us stranded with zero access to our own funds. Please pray for her. We just want our daughter back." I sat frozen, watching my mother deliver the performance of a lifetime. She wove a brilliant, devastating narrative. She positioned herself as the heartbroken, long-suffering matriarch. She positioned me as the unstable, cruel daughter who had lashed out without warning. The comment section beneath the video was a rolling feed of outrage. Church members offered to set up prayer circles. Relatives promised to confront me. Friends told Sylvia to call the police and report the theft of the vacation fund. Sylvia had fired a preemptive strike. She knew I had locked the bank accounts. She knew her husband had threatened me. She knew the entire financial facade was collapsing. Instead of taking accountability, she launched a smear campaign to control the narrative. If she could convince the entire extended family that I was having a psychiatric episode, then any truth I tried to expose would be dismissed as the rambling of a troubled mind. The injustice burned in my chest. I opened a blank text message to my mother. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard. I typed a fierce, blistering paragraph. I told her I knew about the forged lease. I told her I had the fake notary stamp. I told her I was going to hand the entire file over to the district attorney and watch her husband go to prison. My thumb hovered over the send button. I looked at her tear-stained face frozen on my monitor. I realized exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to reply with anger. She wanted me to send a frantic, threatening message so she could screenshot it and post it in the comments as proof of my instability. Defending myself in the court of public opinion was a losing game. You cannot out-argue a professional victim. I deleted the text message. I closed the Facebook app. I muted my notifications. Silence was my best armor. Let them think their smear campaign was working. Let them celebrate their temporary victory. I turned my attention back to my computer screens. The time for emotion had passed. The time for execution had arrived. I opened the portals for the 3 major credit bureaus: Equifax, TransUnion, Experian. I moved through the prompts with clinical speed. I requested a permanent security freeze on my Social Security number. I filed official fraud alerts on my profile. From this moment forward, no one would be able to open a single line of credit in my name. Next, I picked up my desk phone. I dialed the corporate headquarters for the Downtown Property Management Group. I bypassed the standard leasing agents and navigated the automated directory until I reached the regional director of finance. A woman named Sarah answered the line. "My name is Marissa Garcia," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I am calling regarding Unit 402 at the Grand River Lofts. I am listed as the primary guarantor on that lease." "Yes, Miss Garcia," Sarah replied, her tone polite but guarded. "How can I help you today?" "I am calling to formally notify your legal department that the guarantor's signature on that lease is a forgery. I did not sign that document. I did not authorize that residency. Furthermore, the notary stamp belonging to Arthur Vance is fraudulent and expired. I have locked my credit, and I am initiating a formal identity theft investigation." The line went dead quiet. I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end. Property management companies do not take fraud lightly, especially when it threatens a $50,000 lease agreement. "I need you to email me a written statement immediately," Sarah said, her polite tone replaced by urgent professionalism. "If this is true, we have to issue a notice of default to the current tenant." "I will send the email right now," I replied. I hung up the phone. I drafted the formal statement, attached the proof of the expired notary commission, and hit send. I had just pulled the foundation out from underneath my sister's perfectly curated life. The eviction clock was officially ticking. The rest of the workday passed in a blur of corporate audits and routine meetings. I left my office at 6 and drove home through the early evening traffic. The sky above Michigan turned a bruised, dusky purple. My phone remained silent in my purse. I did not check social media. I did not listen to the voicemails piling up in my inbox. By the time I unlocked my front door, the adrenaline that had fueled my afternoon had settled into a hard, cold focus. The house was perfectly quiet. I changed into comfortable clothes, walked into my kitchen, and put a kettle of water on the stove to boil. I stood at the counter, watching the blue flame heat the metal. I felt a profound sense of isolation, but it was not the lonely kind. It was the isolating safety of a fortress built with undeniable facts. The digital clock on my microwave shifted to 10 o'clock. The quiet of the house shattered. The front doorbell rang. It was not a polite, standard chime. Someone was holding their finger down on the button, letting the electronic bell scream continuously through the hallway. Following the chime came the heavy, frantic pounding of fists against the thick wood of my front door. I did not flinch. I did not rush toward the entryway. I set my tea mug down on the granite counter and pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I opened my home security application and tapped the live feed for the porch camera. The screen flickered, then resolved into sharp night vision footage. Standing on my porch, bathed in the harsh white glow of the motion sensor light, was my sister, Jolene. Her designer jacket was unbuttoned, her hair was windblown, her face was distorted with a mixture of raw panic and unfiltered rage. She was screaming something at the door, her breath pluming in the cold night air. In her right hand, she clutched a thick stack of legal documents. I recognized the letterhead even through the grainy camera feed. It was a 14-day notice to quit. The eviction warning had been taped to her luxury condo door. Jolene raised her fist and hammered against my door again. She demanded to be let inside. She demanded that I fix what I had broken. She was about to learn that the sister she had used for years was no longer available for repairs. The pounding on my front door vibrated through the floorboards of my hallway. It was a frantic, rhythmic thudding that sounded like sheer panic. I stood in my dark kitchen holding a mug of tea and watched the security camera feed on my phone. Jolene stood on my porch. She wore a designer wool coat, clutching her phone in one hand and hammering the heavy wood with the other. Her face was flushed red in the harsh glow of the motion sensor light. I pressed the intercom button. My voice echoed out into the freezing Michigan night. "It is late, Jolene. Go home." She jumped at the sound, then leaned close to the camera lens. Her breath plumed in the cold air. "Open the door, Marissa," she demanded. "I know you are in there. You need to sign a release form right now. You are holding our vacation funds hostage, and Dad is losing his mind." "It is not a hostage situation when the funding belongs to me," I replied. My tone remained flat, regulated. Jolene kicked the base of the door. "You are just jealous," she shouted. "You have always been jealous of me. I am marrying Derek. I am building a real life. You are just a bitter spinster sitting alone in a townhouse trying to ruin my happiness because nobody wants you." I took my finger off the intercom button. I let her stand there in the biting wind. I had learned through years of compliance negotiations that silence is a mirror. It forces the other person to look at their own behavior. When nobody argues back, a tantrum loses its fuel. Jolene waited for a response. When none came, she cursed loudly, pulled a thick stack of folded papers from her purse, and shoved them through the brass mail slot at the bottom of the door. "Dad said you leave us no choice," she yelled through the wood. "We will see you in court." She turned on her heel and stormed down the driveway to her leased sports car. I walked into the entryway and picked the papers off the floor mat. The header bore the logo of a cheap strip mall law firm. It was a drafted civil complaint. Plaintiff, Victor Garcia. Defendant, Marissa Garcia. I scanned the first page. The charge listed was elder financial abuse. My father was threatening to sue me for restricting his access to my own paycheck. The document claimed my sudden withdrawal of financial support caused him severe emotional distress and threatened his physical well-being. It was a baseless intimidation tactic. He designed it to frighten a disobedient daughter back into submission. He assumed I would crumble at the sight of legal jargon and a court threat. He forgot that I read complex financial statutes for a living. The threat did not frighten me. It clarified the battlefield. My father proved he was willing to weaponize the legal system to force me into funding his life. I needed a counterstrike. Friday morning, the sky hung low and gray over Grand Rapids. I took a personal day from my firm. I did not drive to a family counselor to talk about my feelings. I drove to the law offices of Brenda Sterling. Brenda was the most feared financial litigator in West Michigan. She did not advertise on park benches or billboards. She handled quiet, high-stakes corporate divorces and partner embezzlements. I secured an hour of her time because one of my firm's managing partners owed me a favor. Brenda sat behind a polished walnut desk. She wore a tailored navy suit and looked at me over wire-rimmed glasses. She did not offer warm platitudes. She asked for facts. I handed her the forged luxury condo lease. I handed her the printed proof of the expired notary stamp. Then I handed her the drafted elder abuse lawsuit my sister had shoved through my mail slot. Brenda read the documents in silence. The only sound in the office was the crisp turning of pages. When she finished, she set the stack down and folded her hands. "Your father is an amateur playing a dangerous game," Brenda said. "This lawsuit is garbage. Any judge will throw it out. But the forged lease and the fake notary seal are state felonies. We can bury him with this evidence alone." "I do not just want to bury him," I replied. "I want to know why a man who owns a 30-year-old hardware business had to steal my identity to co-sign an apartment for his youngest daughter." Brenda tilted her head. "You want to follow the money." "I want a forensic audit of Victor Garcia and Garcia Hardware," I said. "If he is desperate enough to threaten me over an $8,000 travel deposit, the rot goes much deeper. I want to see the ledger." Brenda smiled. It was a cold, surgical expression. "I will petition the court for an emergency discovery order based on the identity theft evidence. We will pull every bank record, every tax return, and every corporate filing attached to his name." The weekend passed in a heavy quiet. I ignored 32 text messages from my mother. I ignored 4 voicemails from Jolene's fiancé, Derek, asking me to call him back so we could smooth things over. I kept my doors locked and my security cameras armed. I spent Saturday digitizing more files and securing my personal accounts. Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Brenda. Her voice lacked its usual steady rhythm. "Marissa, you need to come to my office, right now." An hour later, I sat in the same leather chair across from her desk. Brenda pushed a thick binder toward me. "I pulled his financial history," Brenda said. "Garcia Hardware has been technically insolvent for 3 years. He has defaulted on 2 commercial loans, and his vendor lines of credit are maxed out." "I knew he was broke," I said. "That is why he needed my savings." "That is not why I called you here," Brenda interrupted. She opened the binder to a tab marked with a red sticky note. "Did you know your grandfather Tomas established a trust before he passed away?" I frowned, confused. "Grandfather Tomas died 5 years ago. My father told us he left nothing but medical debt." Brenda slid a copied legal document across the desk. "Your grandfather left a liquid trust account. The sole beneficiary was you. Not your sister, not your father, you. He designated $200,000 explicitly for your future." The breath left my lungs. I stared at the paper. My name was typed clearly on the beneficiary line. $200,000. "Your father was listed as the temporary executor of the estate." Brenda continued, her tone relentless. "He never notified you. He bypassed the probate notifications, forged your signature on a release waiver, and diverted the entire sum into the operating accounts for Garcia Hardware. He drained your inheritance to keep his failing business afloat." I sat frozen. The walls of the office seemed to narrow. 5 years ago, I was 27, struggling to pay off my student loans, working 60-hour weeks to build my career. My grandfather had seen my worth. He tried to secure my independence. My father stole the exit door to secure his own pride. I remembered the week grandfather Tomas died. He held my hand in the hospital and told me he was proud of my work ethic. At the funeral, my father wept loudly at the podium, playing the devastated son for the entire community. He went straight from the cemetery to the bank to siphon my future. The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying precision. The forged condo lease for Jolene, the joint savings account he demanded I fund, the explosive rage over a canceled vacation. The vacation was never the real issue. It was a smokescreen. He needed to keep me pliant, obedient, and financially entangled with the family so I would never have a reason to look closely at his books. If I rebelled, if I separated myself from the pack, I might hire a lawyer. I might run a credit check. I might uncover the $250,000 theft hiding beneath the floorboards of his life. He used my own stolen money to fund my sister's lifestyle. I whispered the reality burning in my throat. He paid for her down payments, her cars, her designer clothes, all while telling me I needed to sacrifice for the greater good of the family. He committed grand larceny, Brenda corrected, and wire fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The statute of limitations has not expired because the fraud was actively concealed. Brenda leaned forward, tapping her pen against the desk. We are not just defending a frivolous elder abuse claim anymore, Marissa. We hold the keys to his prison cell. This is a devastating offensive strike. We can file an injunction tomorrow and freeze every asset he has left. I looked down at my grandfather's trust document. He had seen the truth before anyone else. He knew they treated me like a workhorse. The sadness vanished, evaporating into the conditioned air of the law office. A quiet, searing heat took its place. I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a financial compliance manager holding a loaded ledger. Draft the response to his lawsuit, I told Brenda, but do not file the evidence yet. Do not show them our hand. Brenda raised an eyebrow. Why wait? We can crush them today. Because my father thinks he has me cornered, I said. He thrives on public performance and control. He sent my sister to ambush me on my porch because he believes I am weak. I want to let him set the stage. I want him to believe his intimidation tactic worked. When he realizes his leverage is an illusion, I want him to feel every single second of the fall. Brenda studied my face for a long moment. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across her features. She closed the binder. Tell me your plan. I stood up from the chair. The heavy chains of obligation I had carried for my entire adult life lay broken on the floor. I walked out of the law office into the sharp afternoon light. My family thought they were playing a game of family guilt. They were about to learn they were sitting at a poker table, and I held all the winning cards. 3 days after I left my lawyer's office, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I expected another legal threat. I expected an eviction notice forwarded by my sister. Instead, I looked down and saw a text from my father. The tone gave me whiplash. Marissa, sweetheart, we need to talk. I acted out of anger, and I deeply regret it. Please let us buy you dinner tomorrow night in Detroit, a healing dinner. Let us bring this family back together. I stared at the glowing screen. Less than a week ago, he was threatening to drive to my house and take my car. Now, he was using words like healing and sweetheart. In financial compliance, a sudden shift from hostility to overwhelming warmth is the brightest red flag you can find. A desperate man does not apologize because he found his conscience. He apologizes because he found a new angle to trap you. I typed a single word back. Okay. I did not pack an olive branch. I downloaded a secure audio recording application to my phone. I tested the microphone sensitivity 3 times in my living room. I made sure it could pick up a whisper from across a solid table. My father thought he was inviting a naive daughter to a manipulation session. He was actually inviting a forensic auditor to a documented deposition. The restaurant Victor chose was an upscale steakhouse in downtown Detroit. Valet parking, dim lighting, heavy leather booths, and waiters wearing crisp white aprons. It was the kind of place a failing hardware store owner cannot afford, unless he intends to fund the meal with his daughter's stolen inheritance. I arrived 10 minutes late, on purpose. I wanted them waiting, in the tension. I pressed record on my phone, locked the screen, and slipped the device into the front pocket of my blazer. The hostess guided me past the crowded bar to a secluded booth in the back corner. Victor and Sylvia were already seated. My father wore a tailored charcoal suit. My mother wore a silk blouse and her favorite pearl necklace. They looked like the perfect, successful couple holding court. They stood up when I approached the table. Victor reached out to hug me. I stepped back, keeping exactly 2 feet of empty space between us. His arms fell to his sides. His jaw tightened, but he forced a wide, artificial smile. "Sit down, please," Victor said, pulling out a leather chair. I went ahead and ordered the Reserve Cabernet, your favorite. I do not drink Cabernet. Jolene drinks Cabernet. I ordered a sparkling water with a slice of lime. For the next hour, Victor and Sylvia put on a masterclass in psychological theater. They did not mention the frozen bank accounts. They did not mention the canceled Hawaii trip. They did not mention the police incident on my front porch. They asked about my job. They asked about my townhouse renovations. They pretended the past week had never happened. They played the roles of concerned, loving parents trying to reconnect with a distant child. I ate my salmon and offered short, flat answers. I watched my father swirl the dark wine in his crystal glass. His knuckles were bone white. His left leg bounced under the table, vibrating the floorboards. The performance was draining his energy. He was a man running out of time, trying to buy my trust with an expensive cut of meat. As the waiter cleared our dinner plates and wiped the crumbs from the table, the atmosphere in the booth shifted. The fake warmth evaporated, replaced by a tense, focused energy. Victor cleared his throat and nodded at Sylvia. My mother reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out a thick manila envelope and placed it gently on the white tablecloth. She slid it across the polished wood until it stopped right next to my water glass. "Marissa," Sylvia began, her voice dripping with rehearsed sorrow. "This family has been fractured for too long. Your father and I have made mistakes. We admit that. We let stress dictate our actions. We forgot what truly matters. We want to move forward." Victor interrupted, leaning across the table, his eyes locked on mine. "We want you back in the family. We want you on that flight to Hawaii. The reservation is still there. We just need to put all this ugliness behind us." I looked down at the unmarked envelope. "What is this?" "A fresh start," Victor said. He pulled a silver pen from his jacket pocket and placed it delicately on top of the envelope. "It is a simple family reconciliation contract. Just a piece of paper saying we agree to drop all grievances. We stop arguing about money. We reinstate the joint accounts, and we go back to being a family. You sign it, and everything goes back to normal." I did not touch the pen. I opened the envelope and pulled out the crisp white pages. The document was 3 pages long. It contained dense, complex legal jargon. It did not read like a family apology. It read like a corporate liability waiver. My eyes scanned the paragraphs, cutting through the emotional fluff to find the legal trap. I found what I was looking for on page 2, paragraph 4. The clause was buried under a long section about mutual forgiveness and family unity. It stated that by signing the document, the undersigned formally released Victor Garcia from any and all claims of past financial mismanagement, fiduciary errors, or unauthorized reallocation of family assets. They did not want me back in the family. They wanted legal immunity. Victor knew Brenda was digging into his business accounts. He knew his financial walls were caving in. He needed my signature to absolve him of grand larceny before the forensic audit reached a judge. I turned to the final page. My breath caught in my throat, not from sadness, but from the sheer audacity of the crime sitting in front of me. At the bottom of the signature page, right next to the blank line where my name was supposed to go, was a blue ink stamp. It was an official state notary seal. The seal belonged to a man named Donovan Hayes, a commercial supplier who did business with my father's hardware store. The document was already notarized. A notary is legally required to witness a signature in person. Donovan Hayes was not in the restaurant. He had pre-stamped a blank legal waiver as a favor to his corrupt business partner. My father had brought a fraudulent, pre-notarized immunity contract to a steakhouse and tried to disguise it as an olive branch. I looked up from the paper. Victor was watching me with hungry, desperate eyes. He pushed the silver pen an inch closer to my hand. "Just sign it, sweetheart," Victor urged, his voice tight with anticipation. "Let us heal. Let us go to the beach and forget all this nonsense. We can be a happy family again." Sylvia reached across the table, her fingers hovering near mine. "We love you so much. Please, do the right thing for your family." I picked up the silver pen. I felt the cold metal against my fingers. I watched my father exhale a long, shaking breath of relief. He thought he had won. He thought the expensive steak and the cheap tears had worked. He thought I was still the obedient daughter who would sacrifice her own future to erase his mistakes. I held the pen over the signature line. The hidden application on my phone continued to record every single word spoken in that quiet booth. I looked at the fake notary stamp. Then I raised my head and locked eyes with my father. I did not blink. I kept my voice perfectly level, stripping away every ounce of emotion until only the cold truth remained. "I have one question before I sign this," I said quietly. "Anything," Victor replied, a triumphant smile breaking across his face. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the white tablecloth, closing the distance between us. "Does this waiver cover Grandfather Tomas's trust?" The triumphant smile vanished from my father's face. The blood instantly drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin the shade of wet ash. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Beside him, Sylvia dropped her fork. It hit the porcelain plate with a sharp crack that echoed across the dining room. "Does this waiver cover Grandfather Tomas's trust?" Sylvia drops her fork. It hits the edge of her fine porcelain plate with a sharp, piercing crack that cuts straight through the low, polite hum of the upscale dining room. The heavy silver utensil clatters onto the hardwood floor. She does not reach down to pick it up. She does not even blink. She just stares at me, her carefully rehearsed expression of maternal sorrow fracturing into raw shock. Across the table, Victor's face loses all of its color. The confident, expansive posture of the generous patriarch vanishes in a single heartbeat. His shoulders hunch forward. His mouth opens, but the smooth salesman pitch he relies on fails him entirely. He stammers, offering a broken string of half-syllables, demanding to know what I am talking about. His eyes dart toward the exits, a subconscious reflex of a man who knows he has been caught. I do not raise my voice. In financial compliance, you learn that raising your volume surrenders your authority. The truth is heavy enough to carry its own weight. I reach into the structured leather tote bag sitting on the floor beside my chair. I pull out my own manila folder. It is significantly thicker than the one my mother brought to the table. It contains hours of forensic accounting, strict legal filings, and cold, hard facts. I place it on the white tablecloth, letting it rest right next to their fraudulent reconciliation contract. "I am talking about $250,000. I say, keeping my tone as even and relentless as a ticking clock. "I am talking about a trust account established 5 years ago by your father, designating me as the sole exclusive beneficiary, an account you deliberately drained to keep your hardware store from going under." I open my folder. I slide the first document across the table until it touches Victor's water glass. It is a certified copy of the original trust declaration bearing Grandfather Tomas's unmistakable signature. Next to it, I place Brenda Sterling's forensic audit. The pages display clear, highlighted ledger lines tracking the wire transfers from the trust directly into Garcia Hardware's operating accounts. Victor stares at the papers. His eyes dart back and forth across the highlighted numbers. He knows exactly what he is looking at. He is looking at his own undeniable ruin. "There is a misunderstanding," Victor chokes out. His voice is a desperate, thin whisper, stripped of all its usual bravado. "That money was for family expenses, for your upbringing. A father has a right to manage household resources. I was 27 years old, I reply, leaning forward just an inch. I was paying my own rent. I was funding my own life. You did not spend a single dime of that money on my upbringing. You stole it to cover your bad business bets. I slide the next stack of papers forward. But you did not stop there. You needed more credit to keep funding Jolene's luxury lifestyle, so you used my name. I present the forged luxury condo lease. I tap my finger on the fraudulent signature at the bottom of the page. Then I place the printout of the expired notary commission record right beside it, highlighting the fake stamp from his corrupt business partner. Identity theft. I state, laying out the charges the way I lay out compliance violations at my firm. Wire fraud, grand larceny, forging a legal instrument. Every single action documented here is a state felony. You did not make a miscalculation. You built a criminal enterprise out of my Social Security number. The reality of the legal peril finally breaches Victor's panic. His survival instinct kicks in, bypassing any remaining shred of dignity. He lunges across the table. His hand darts out, attempting to snatch the folder and rip the evidence away from my side of the booth. I anticipate the move. I place my hand flat on the center of the open folder and slide it smoothly out of his reach. Do not bother, I tell him, watching his hand retreat in defeat. These are copies. The originals are locked inside a fireproof safe at my attorney's office. I lean back in my chair, creating physical distance between us. Brenda Sterling already petitioned the court for an emergency discovery order. The bank's fraud department received the full financial audit at noon today. We notified the property management company about the forged lease yesterday afternoon. You cannot shred your way out of this room. The trap is fully sprung. The plush leather walls of the restaurant booth seem to close in on them. They came here to manipulate me into signing away my legal rights over an expensive stake. They are leaving as the primary targets of a major financial investigation. This is the precise moment a healthy parent would break down in genuine remorse. A healthy parent would beg for forgiveness, horrified by the damage they caused their own child. My mother does not do that. She is entirely incapable of it. Sylvia realizes the private manipulation tactic has failed, so she pivots to her only remaining defense mechanism: public theater. She presses both hands to her face and begins to cry. It is not a quiet, devastated weeping. It is a loud, jagged wail designed to draw maximum attention from every corner of the dining room. She rocks back and forth in her seat, burying her face in her palms. Diners at the adjacent tables stop eating. A waiter carrying a tray of drinks pauses mid-step near the wine rack, unsure if he should intervene. Heads turn in our direction, drawn by the spectacle of a weeping woman in pearls. "She is sick," Sylvia cries out, her voice pitched loud enough for the neighboring booths to hear clearly. She reaches across the table, acting like a terrified mother trying to soothe a deranged child. "You are sick, Marissa. You are delusional. You are making up these horrible lies because you need psychiatric help. Please let us get you to a doctor." She is trying to plant a false narrative in real time. If she can make the room believe I am having a severe mental breakdown, she can walk out of the restaurant casting herself as the tragic victim. She wants the wealthy patrons of Detroit to feel sorry for the poor, long-suffering woman dealing with an unstable daughter. I watch her perform. I feel a profound sense of pity, not for her, but for the child I used to be. The little girl who spent decades trying to earn the love of a woman who operates like a cornered snake. Victor ignores his wife's theatrical display entirely. His focus remains locked onto me. The panic in his eyes hardens into something venomous and dark. The charming patriarch mask strips away, revealing the desperate, ruthless man hiding underneath. He leans over the table. His face is inches from mine, his breath smelling of expensive wine and fear. His voice drops into a low, terrifying snarl. "If you do not call off your lawyer right now, you will destroy this family." He hisses the words, vibrating with threat. The scandal will ruin Garcia Hardware. Jolene's fiancé will call off the wedding when he finds out about the eviction. You will drag our name through the mud and ruin your sister's future. He still thinks the family name holds some sacred power over me. He still believes Jolene's happiness is my required responsibility. He assumes that lifelong guilt will force me to back down and protect them. I look at the man who drained my grandfather's inheritance to buy his favorite child a luxury condo. I look at the woman wailing for an audience of strangers to protect her own pride. I reach into my blazer pocket. I pull out a crisp $50 bill. I drop it onto the center of the white tablecloth, letting it fall right on top of their fraudulent reconciliation contract. That covers my sparkling water, I say. I stand up and push my heavy wooden chair in. I look my father direct in the eye. I deliver the final line with perfect, unbreakable clarity. You destroyed the family the day you stole my name. I turn and walk away. I leave them sitting in the back booth of the upscale steakhouse. They have an exorbitant dinner bill they cannot pay because their joint accounts are running on fumes. They have a public scene they cannot control. And they have the undeniable knowledge that the daughter they treated like a disposable utility has just foreclosed on their entire existence. I walk past the hostess stand, ignoring the stares of the staff. I push through the heavy glass doors and step out into the cool Detroit night. The city air smells like exhaust and impending rain, but to my lungs, it smells like pure, unfiltered freedom. I hand my claim ticket to the valet. As I stand on the curb waiting for my car, my phone vibrates in my pocket. I pull it out. The caller ID shows Brenda Sterling. I answer on the first ring. Tell me you have an update. I have a triumphant update, Brenda says. Her voice hums with sharp, professional satisfaction. I just got off the phone with the primary commercial lender for Garcia Hardware. Their fraud division reviewed the documents we sent over, and they moved faster than we anticipated. The valet pulls my sedan up to the curb. I tip him open the door and slide into the quiet sanctuary of the driver's seat. What did the bank do? I ask, pulling my seatbelt across my chest. They hit the kill switch, Brenda replies. Based on our undeniable evidence of grand larceny and forged loan guarantees, the bank officially froze every single business account tied to Victor Garcia. They locked his merchant processing lines. They halted his payroll distributions. The freeze went active 15 minutes ago. I grip the steering wheel. The engine idles with a low, steady hum. He has zero access to capital. Brenda continues laying out the exact dimensions of the trap. When he wakes up tomorrow morning, his entire hardware business will be paralyzed. The suppliers will not get paid. The employees will not receive their checks. He is officially locked out of his own empire. Thank you, Brenda, for everything. Get some sleep, Marissa. Tomorrow is going to be a very loud day in Grand Rapids. I end the call and place my phone in the cup holder. I pull out into the steady flow of traffic heading west. My parents spent 20 years treating my life as a convenient funding source for their golden child. Tomorrow the sun will rise, the bank doors will open, and they will finally discover what happens when the funding source shuts the power off for good. Friday morning broke gray and bitterly cold over Grand Rapids. While I sat at my kitchen island drinking black tea, the banking system executed the injunction. I knew the exact sequence of events because I understand the anatomy of a financial freeze. It does not happen with a loud explosion. It happens in a series of quiet, devastating clicks. At 8 in the morning, my father unlocked the front doors of Garcia Hardware. He flipped the open sign, expecting another day of pretending to be a successful local businessman. The store smelled of cut pine and brass fittings, a scent he had worn like a badge of honor for decades. At 8:15, his payroll processing company attempted to automatically draw funds to cover the weekly employee checks. The bank's automated clearinghouse returned a code. Access denied. By 9, a supplier truck backed into the loading dock. The driver walked inside holding a clipboard and a past due invoice for $20,000 worth of inventory. When my father tried to run the corporate card to cover the shipment, the terminal beeped. Declined. The driver packed up his pallets, rolled down the truck door, and drove away, leaving empty shelves behind. My father realized he had been locked out of his own life. I arrived at my office, placed my purse in the drawer, and checked my phone. The screen displayed 5 missed calls. The voicemails rolled in, one after another, painting a real-time portrait of a man losing his grip on reality. I pressed play on the first message. His voice sounded thin, breathless, attempting to project reason. "Marissa, sweetheart, the bank made an error. They froze the accounts. You need to call your lawyer and clear this up. We are blood. We can sit down and talk about the trust money like adults." He still thought he could negotiate his way out of grand larceny. He still believed I would protect his reputation to avoid a public scandal. I listened to the second message, left 40 minutes later. The thin veneer of reason had evaporated. He shouted into the receiver, his breath rough and ragged. "You ungrateful brat! You think you can destroy my business? I will ruin you. I will call your firm. I will tell them you are a thief." I did not block his number. I pressed save on every single recording. In financial compliance, you never interrupt someone who is busy documenting their own guilt. I forwarded the audio files directly to Brenda Sterling. Evidence always speaks louder than insults. While my father watched his hardware store crumble, my sister Jolene was waking up in her downtown high-rise. She brewed expensive espresso and checked her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows, entirely unaware that the foundation of her luxury lifestyle had already vanished. Around 10 in the morning, a heavy knock echoed through her condo. When she opened the front door, a property manager stood in the hallway holding a clipboard. He handed her a sealed, formal envelope, then turned and walked away. Jolene opened the envelope. Inside was a 14-day notice to quit. The property management company formally stated that the primary guarantor signature on her lease had been flagged as a fraudulent instrument. She had 2 weeks to vacate the premises or face immediate eviction proceedings. Jolene panicked. She grabbed her phone and dialed our father, expecting him to throw cash at the problem. She expected him to write a check, hire a lawyer, and make the frightening paperwork disappear. Instead, her father answered the phone in a panic of his own. He told her the business accounts were frozen. He told her there was no cash. He told her they were ruined. An hour later, the elevator chimed at the end of Jolene's hallway. Her fiancé, Derek, stepped out, holding 2 coffees he had picked up on his way to surprise her. Derek came from real money. He wore tailored suits, drove a spotless import, and genuinely believed he was marrying into a respectable, hard-working family. He walked up to the condo door and stopped. Jolene had dropped the eviction notice in the hallway when she ran to call our father. Derek picked up the heavy legal paper. He read the bold print. He saw the words fraudulent guarantor and immediate eviction. He unlocked the door and found Jolene sobbing on the expensive suede sofa. He held up the paper asking what was happening. Jolene possessed a terrifying survival instinct. She realized she could not tell the man she planned to marry that her family was broke, that her father was a thief, and that her apartment was secured by forgery. She needed a scapegoat. She needed a villain. She looked at Derek, tears streaming down her perfect face, and spun a brilliant, desperate lie. She claimed I had suffered a mental break. She told Derek I had always been intensely jealous of her success, her beauty, and her upcoming wedding. She sobbed, weaving a story about how I had stolen her identity to ruin her credit, canceled the family vacation out of pure spite, and manufactured a fake legal dispute to terrorize our aging parents. Derek listened to the woman he loved crying on the sofa. He did not ask for evidence. He saw her distress and decided he needed to be the hero. He decided he needed to handle the unstable, jealous older sister who was trying to destroy his future wife. At 1 o'clock, I took the elevator down to the lobby of my office building to grab a salad from the cafe across the street. The lobby featured polished marble floors and tall glass revolving doors. People moved in a steady, quiet stream of professional efficiency. As the elevator doors parted, I spotted Derek. He stood near the security desk, arms crossed, his jaw set in a tight, angry line. He scanned the crowd, spotted me, and marched directly into my path. "We need to talk," Derek said. He did not offer a greeting. He used the tone of a man accustomed to giving orders and having people scramble to obey them. I paused, keeping my posture relaxed, holding my leather tote bag over my shoulder. "Hello, Derek. This is a surprise." "I know what you are doing," he stated, stepping closer, attempting to use his height to intimidate me. "Jolene told me everything. You are sick, Marissa. Stealing her identity, trying to get her evicted right before our wedding, canceling your parents' trip just to hurt them." I looked at him. I saw a man who thought he was defending a princess, oblivious to the fact that he was guarding a swamp. "Is that what she told you?" I asked, keeping my voice mild conversational. "She told me the truth," Derek snapped. "I am telling you to drop this vendetta right now. If you do not withdraw these fake claims with her building management, I will have my personal attorneys file a harassment suit against you by the end of the day. You will not ruin her life." He delivered the threat with conviction. He expected me to flinch. He expected me to offer a frantic defense, to stammer, to cry, or to back down in the face of his wealth and authority. I felt a brief flicker of pity for him. He was a pawn in a game he did not even know he was playing. "Derek," I said quietly, "you are threatening a financial compliance manager with a lawsuit over forged documents." He frowned, the certainty in his eyes wavering for a fraction of a second. "I do not care what your job is. I care that you are terrorizing my fiancé." I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. Arguing with a person who believes a lie only gives them a reason to dig their heels in deeper. I simply reached into my leather tote bag. I had anticipated this. When a toxic system collapses, the people inside it will always send a messenger to silence the person who pulled the pin. I had prepared a specific package before I left the house this morning. I pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. The paper felt heavy, substantial. I held it out to him. Derek stared at it, refusing to take it. "What is this?" "This is the truth," I replied, pressing the envelope against his chest until he reflexively brought his hands up to grasp it. "Inside, you will find a certified forensic audit of Garcia Hardware. You will find the original trust documents from my late grandfather, proving my father stole $200,000 from me. And you will find the copy of Jolene's lease, complete with the expired fraudulent notary stamp my father used to forge my signature." Derek's hands tightened around the thick paper. He looked from the envelope to my face, his confident posture fracturing. "Jolene said you were making this up," he murmured, the volume of his voice dropping significantly. "Jolene says whatever she needs to say to keep you paying the bills," I answered, stepping around him toward the revolving doors. I paused and looked back over my shoulder. He stood frozen in the center of the marble lobby, clutching the weight of my family's lies in his hands. "Read the audit, Derek," I told him, the words echoing off the polished stone walls. "Read every single page, and do it before you sign a marriage license." I walked out into the crisp Michigan air. Behind me, the glass doors spun, leaving him alone with the evidence that would shatter his wedding before the invitations were even mailed. Derek sat behind the wheel of his import sedan, the engine idling in the parking garage of my office building. The thick manila envelope rested on his lap. He broke the seal. He pulled out the stack of papers, the interior dome light casting a pale glow across the ink. The first page was Brenda Sterling's forensic audit of Garcia Hardware. He read columns of red numbers, maxed out credit lines, defaulted commercial loans, and bounced payroll checks. He flipped to the next document. It was Grandfather Tomas's original trust declaration. He read the clause designating $200,000 explicitly for me. Then he saw the bank transfer logs, showing those exact funds being drained into a failing business account. Finally, he reached the last page, the lease agreement for the luxury downtown condo where he planned to start his married life. He saw my forged signature on the guarantor line. He saw the expired notary stamp belonging to a retired hardware supplier. Jolene had told him her father was a highly successful entrepreneur. She claimed her family was paying for their 300-person wedding out of traditional pride and wealth. The truth sat right in his hands. His future wife was not an heiress. She was a participant in a financial shell game funded entirely by the sister she claimed was unstable. He placed the papers back into the envelope, put the car in drive, and headed downtown. Derek unlocked the door to the high-rise condo. Jolene sat on the suede sofa, an unfinished glass of wine resting on the coffee table. She wiped her eyes, playing the exhausted, terrified victim. "Derek," she said, her voice trembling, "I am so glad you are back. Did you talk to her? Did you get her to drop those ridiculous lies?" Derek did not take off his tailored coat. He tossed the thick envelope onto the glass table. It landed with a heavy, definitive slap. "I talked to her," Derek said, his voice stripped of all warmth. "She gave me some reading material." Jolene looked down at the papers spilling out of the folder. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin the shade of wet ash. She stood up, her hands shaking. "Derek, whatever she gave you, it is a fabrication. I told you she is sick. She is trying to ruin us because she is jealous." Derek shook his head. "Audits do not lie, Jolene. Forged notary stamps do not lie." He pointed at the lease on the table. "Your father stole your sister's inheritance to keep his hardware store open. He stole her identity to pay for this apartment. And you knew. You signed a lease knowing you had zero income to support it." Jolene stepped forward, reaching for his arm. The tears started falling fast and heavy. "I did not know about the trust. I swear on my life, my dad handled the lease paperwork. I just signed where he told me to. He said he was taking care of it." Derek stepped back, refusing her touch. The tears did not work anymore. He saw the cold calculation hiding behind her wet eyes. "You told me your family was wealthy," he said, keeping his tone chillingly precise. "You let me put down $40,000 in vendor deposits for a country club wedding, knowing your parents could not even afford a plane ticket to Hawaii. You lied to my face every single day." Jolene choked on a sob. "We can still get married. We do not need the big luxury wedding. Just you and me. We can go to a courthouse." Derek looked around the apartment, noticing the expensive furniture, the designer clothes draped over a dining chair, the imported espresso machine. None of it was earned. All of it was stolen. "Take off the ring," he said. Jolene froze. "What?" "The ring. Take it off right now." She clutched her left hand to her chest. "Derek, please, you cannot do this. I love you." "You love my credit limit," he replied, "and mine is not available for forgery." He held out his hand, palm up. Jolene cried harder, begging, pleading, promising she would make it right, promising she would get a job and pay him back for everything. Derek did not lower his hand. He did not blink. Finally, her shoulders slumped. She slid the 3-carat diamond off her finger and dropped it into his palm. "The wedding is canceled," Derek said, turning toward the door. "I am pulling the venue deposits in the morning. You have a 14-day eviction notice to deal with. Do not contact me again." The door clicked shut. Jolene was left standing alone in a stolen apartment with no fiancé, no wedding, and a financial collapse she could no longer outrun. The digital clock on my nightstand shifted to midnight. I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. The financial chains holding me down were gone, but the silence in my townhouse felt heavy, thick with the anticipation of a falling shoe. I did not have to wait long. A car engine roared down my quiet suburban street. Tires screeched against the pavement, stopping abruptly in front of my driveway. A car door slammed hard enough to rattle the frame. Heavy footsteps pounded up my front walk. "Marissa." The scream shattered the quiet neighborhood. It was high, ragged, ripped straight from the throat. "Marissa, come out here." I sat up. I did not turn on the bedroom light. I walked out into the dark hallway and looked down at the front entryway. Through the glass panels framing my front door, I saw a silhouette pacing on the frost-covered lawn. It was Jolene. She marched toward the edge of my flower bed and picked up a heavy landscaping rock. I realized what she was about to do a second before she did it. I stepped back against the wall. The rock smashed through the large bay window of my living room. Glass exploded inward, showering the hardwood floor in thousands of jagged pieces. The rock rolled to a stop against the base of my sofa. The freezing night wind rushed through the shattered frame, carrying her voice inside. "You ruined my life," Jolene shrieked through the broken window. "He left me. He took the ring. You ruined everything." I did not yell back. I did not engage with the hysteria. I reached for the keypad on the wall and pressed the emergency panic button. The home security alarm began to wail a piercing siren that echoed down the block. Lights flicked on in the houses next door. I walked into the kitchen, picked up my phone, and called police dispatch. I gave them my address and stated that a woman had just thrown a rock through my window and was currently trespassing on my property. I stayed in the dark kitchen while Jolene continued to scream insults from the lawn. She blamed me for Derek leaving. She blamed me for the eviction. She blamed me for our father's failing business. She took accountability for nothing. Her entire worldview relied on making someone else pay for her mistakes, and she could not process a reality where the bill was finally handed directly to her. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, until red and blue lights washed across my kitchen cabinets. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb. Officers stepped out, flashlights sweeping the yard. They found my sister standing near the broken glass, crying, expensive mascara running down her cheeks. She tried to play the victim for the police. She sobbed, pointing at my house, telling the officers that I had stolen her money and destroyed her wedding. The officers were not interested in family gossip. They were interested in the shattered bay window and the fist-sized rock sitting on my living room rug. I put on a thick winter coat, unlocked my front door, and stepped out onto the porch. My shoes crunched on the broken glass. An officer approached me with a notepad. "Do you know this woman, ma'am?" he asked. "She's my sister," I said, keeping my voice steady over the sound of Jolene weeping. "She threw that rock through my window. I have her on my exterior security cameras." Jolene looked up, her face twisted in disbelief. "Tell them it was an accident, Marissa. Tell them we were just fighting." She expected me to cover for her. She expected the lifelong habit of protecting the golden child to kick in. She assumed the police would leave and we would sweep up the glass together like a normal, dysfunctional family. I looked at the officer. "I want to press charges for vandalism and trespassing," I stated. The officer nodded. He turned to his partner. They asked Jolene to turn around and place her hands behind her back. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut carried clearly in the cold air. Neighbors stood on their porches, pulling their robes tight, watching the perfect Garcia daughter get guided into the back of a squad car. Jolene stopped crying. She stared at me through the wire mesh of the cruiser window. She finally understood that the safety net was gone. The police drove away, taking the flashing lights with them. I stood on my porch for a long time, feeling the winter wind blow through the hole in my house. It was a mess I would have to clean up. But it was my mess, not theirs. 2 hours later, my cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed my mother's cell number. I let it ring 3 times before I swiped answer. Marissa. Sylvia's voice was a frantic, breathy sob. The background noise sounded hollow, echoing. She was calling from the police precinct lobby. "Marissa, you have to call them. You have to drop the charges right now. They are processing her." I sat at my kitchen counter, picking a small piece of shattered glass off my sleeve. "She broke my window, Mom. She trespassed on my property." She was upset, Sylvia cried, her tone shifting into a desperate plea. "She lost her fiancé tonight. She lost her wedding. You pushed her to the edge. You cannot let your own sister go to jail. Please, sweetheart, blood is blood." I closed my eyes. The old script. The familiar guilt trip. For years, blood is blood was the excuse they used to drain my bank account. It was the justification for skipping my milestones to attend hers. It was the blanket they threw over every broken promise and stolen dollar. I opened my eyes. The kitchen felt very quiet, very mine. "You are right," I said softly into the receiver. "Blood is blood." Sylvia exhaled a shaky breath of relief, thinking she had won, thinking the old compliance manager had returned to fix the ledger. But Blood Eye continued stripping every ounce of warmth from my voice. "Is exactly what you used to forge my signature on her lease." I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button. The call ended. I set the device face down on the granite counter. The line was severed. I knew my mother was standing in a stark police lobby, holding a silent phone, realizing she had no leverage left. But the night was not over. When cornered, a desperate man will always make one final, fatal move to save his pride. And my father was about to make a choice that would bring the entire legal system down on his head. When a man who has spent his entire life controlling others suddenly finds himself with nothing left to control, he does not surrender. He tries to change the rules of the game. Victor Garcia had lost access to his business accounts. His vendors were walking away, his employees were unpaid, and a forensic audit was currently sitting on the desk of a major commercial lender. He knew a civil lawsuit over my stolen inheritance was imminent. He knew that once a judge reviewed the ledger, the court would order restitution. And he knew his only remaining asset of any real value was the family home. So he made a choice that only a truly desperate person would make. He tried to hide the house. I learned about his maneuver on a Friday afternoon when my attorney, Brenda Sterling, called my office. Her voice held the sharp, clinical satisfaction of a professional who had just anticipated an opponent's worst impulse and cut it off at the knees. She told me Victor had attempted to execute a quick claim deed. He had hastily formed a shell corporation, a limited liability company registered under a friend's name, and tried to transfer the deed of the Garcia residence into that new entity. His goal was transparent. If he no longer owned the house on paper, a court could not force him to sell it to repay the $250,000 he stole from my grandfather's trust. He wanted to shield his wealth behind a corporate veil, leaving me with a worthless legal victory and an empty bank account. He assumed he could process the paperwork faster than the legal system could catch him. He underestimated my legal counsel. Brenda did not wait for his paperwork to process. The very same morning she initiated the forensic audit, she had driven down to the county recorder's office and filed a specific, devastating legal instrument known as a lis pendens. For those unfamiliar with real estate law, a lis pendens is a formal public notice of pending litigation. It attaches directly to the property record, like a neon warning sign. It tells any bank, any buyer, and any county clerk that the title of the house is currently under legal dispute. When Victor walked into the clerk's office and tried to record his fraudulent transfer, the system rejected it. The title was clouded. He could not sell the property. He could not transfer the deed. He could not take out a secondary mortgage to hire a criminal defense attorney. The lis pendens acted as a heavy iron padlock on the front door of his financial life. He was legally trapped inside a burning building of his own making, and I held the only key. The reality of his containment broke whatever thin layer of restraint he had left. It happened on a Sunday evening. I was running a mundane errand picking up groceries at a local market in Grand Rapids. The air was biting, carrying that distinct Michigan chill that warns of an incoming frost. I pushed my cart out of the sliding glass doors, walking toward my parked sedan under the harsh, buzzing glow of the sodium streetlights. I carried 2 canvas bags, thinking about the upcoming work week, enjoying the simple, unglamorous piece of a life I funded with my own honest labor. I popped the trunk and lifted the first bag. A shadow detached itself from the side of a large SUV parked 2 spaces away. Footsteps crunched heavy and fast across the cold asphalt. I turned my hand, dropping instinctively toward my keys. Victor stood 10 feet away. He looked terrible. The polished, arrogant patriarch who had laughed at me over a steak dinner just weeks ago had vanished. He wore a wrinkled jacket that smelled faintly of stale smoke. His posture was slumped, the confident square of his shoulders replaced by a hollow, exhausted curve. But his eyes retained that familiar, dangerous entitlement. He looked like a king who had been locked out of his castle and blamed the locksmith. I closed the trunk, making sure the latch clicked shut. I did not step back. I stood my ground, leaning against the bumper of my car, and waited for him to speak. He cleared his throat, attempting to summon the deep, commanding tone he used to silence me when I was a child. It came out ragged. "We need to resolve this tonight, Marissa." I looked at him, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "There is nothing to resolve in a parking lot, Victor. You can speak to Brenda Sterling during regular business hours." I turned toward the driver's side door. He stepped into my path, cutting off my exit. The proximity forced me to look up at him. "Do not walk away from your father," he ordered, his voice dropping into a harsh, tight register. I paused. "You stopped being my father the day you decided my signature was yours to forge. Move out of my way." He did not move. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket. For a brief second, the chill in the air turned to ice, but he only pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out toward me, his hand trembling. I could not tell if the tremor came from the cold or from raw, unmanaged stress. "I have a proposition," he said, forcing his face into a stiff, unnatural mask of diplomacy. "A settlement. We keep the courts out of family business. You lift the freeze on my company accounts, and you withdraw that notice on my house. In exchange, I am prepared to offer you a generous family settlement to cover any misunderstandings about your grandfather's estate." I looked at the folded paper in his hand. I did not take it. "A settlement." He nodded, leaning forward, mistaking my silence for consideration. $30,000, cash transfer by Tuesday morning. You take the money, you drop the vendetta, and we go our separate ways. It is a fair offer, Marissa. It gets you capital now, and it saves everyone the humiliation of a public trial. I stared at him. The sheer, staggering audacity of the proposal hung in the freezing air between us. He had siphoned $200,000 of my rightful inheritance to cover his bad debts. He had stolen my identity to finance his golden child's luxury apartment. He had threatened to take my car over an $8,000 vacation deposit. And now, cornered by his own actions, he wanted to buy his salvation with pennies. He wanted to tip me with a fraction of my own stolen money and call it generous. A laugh bubbled up from my chest. It was not a humorous sound. It was dry, hollow, and sharp enough to cut glass. The laugh echoed across the empty asphalt. Victor flinched, his false diplomacy shattering. "What is funny to you?" I shook my head, marveling at the delusion standing in front of me. "You stole $200,000, I stated, enunciating every single syllable, so the math could not be ignored. You committed identity theft. You committed wire fraud. You drained a trust fund explicitly meant for my future. And your grand strategy is to offer me a 15% refund of my own stolen property to avoid going to prison." I took a step forward, closing the distance, refusing to shrink. "I am not settling for $30,000, Victor. I want every single cent you took. I want the legal fees covered, I want the punitive damages paid, and I want the public record to show exactly what kind of man you really are." The color drained from his face, replaced by a dark, surging red. The realization that he could no longer buy, manipulate, or intimidate his way out of the trap finally broke his mind. The mask of the businessman vanished. Only the bully remained. "You ungrateful little witch," he hissed his breath, pluming in the cold. "You think you can destroy my life. You think you can take my home." He lunged forward, his right arm pulled back, his fist clenching tight. The instinct of a man who resorts to physical force the moment his authority is challenged. He aimed to strike me right there under the harsh parking lot lights, willing to use violence to punish the disobedience he could not control. I did not flinch. I did not raise my arms to block him. I simply lifted my left hand. My cell phone was gripped securely in my palm. The screen was facing him, bright and illuminated. In the center of the screen, the red recording timer was blinking steadily, 1 minute and 42 seconds. I had pressed record the moment I saw his shadow detach from the SUV. Victor froze. His raised fist halted midair inches from my shoulder. His eyes locked onto the digital numbers ticking upward on the screen. He saw the microphone picking up the ambient noise. He saw the undeniable, documented proof of his raised hand and his hostile threat. "Go ahead," I whispered, my voice as calm as deep water. "Strike me. Add felony assault to the grand larceny charges. Brenda will have the police at your door before you reach your driveway." He stood paralyzed, caught between blind rage and sudden, piercing terror. He looked at the phone, then at my face. He searched my eyes for any trace of the frightened, obedient daughter he used to command. He found nothing but a financial auditor holding a digital ledger. Slowly, painfully, his fist uncurled. His arm dropped to his side. The fight drained out of him, leaving a hollow, broken shell of a man standing in the cold. He backed away, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He did not say another word. He turned, walked back to his vehicle, got inside, and drove away, leaving tire marks on the frost-covered pavement. I unlocked my car, sat in the driver's seat, and pressed stop on the recording. I saved the file and forwarded it directly to Brenda Sterling's secure server. The parking lot ambush was his final, desperate gasp. The street fight was officially over. He had tried intimidation, he had tried fraud, and he had tried violence. Every single tactic had failed. There were no more shadows for him to hide in, no more secret maneuvers he could pull. The next time we faced each other, it would not be in a grocery store parking lot. It would be across a polished table under the harsh glare of fluorescent office lights, with a court reporter documenting every breath. The legal battle was heading to formal depositions, where every lie, every forged document, and every stolen dollar would finally be dragged into the light and sworn to under oath. He was going to have to answer for his crimes on the official record, and no amount of shouting was going to save him. Law offices keep their conference rooms at 68 degrees on purpose. The chill is designed to keep clients awake and opposing counsel uncomfortable. I wore a tailored wool blazer and sat with my hands folded loosely in my lap. I felt perfectly fine. Across the long oak table, my father looked like he was sitting in a sauna. A slow, steady bead of sweat gathered at his temple, rolling down his jawline to soak into his stiff, white collar. The deposition began at 9 in the morning. A court reporter sat in the corner, her fingers resting lightly on the keys of her steno machine. Next to my parents sat their defense attorney, a man named William Davis. Davis wore a very expensive suit and carried the tired posture of a lawyer who already suspected his clients were lying to him. Brenda Sterling sat beside me. She did not open with threats. She opened a plain, black binder and began reading into the record. She asked Victor Garcia to state his full name. She asked him to raise his right hand. She asked him to swear that the testimony he was about to give was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. My father swore the oath. His voice carried a faint tremor. He was a man used to dictating reality in his hardware store in his living room. He was not used to a room where a single lie could result in a perjury charge. Brenda slid the first piece of paper across the polished wood. It was a certified copy of the trust declaration signed by grandfather Tomas 5 years ago. "Mr. Garcia," Brenda said, her voice smooth and conversational, "do you recognize this document?" Victor cleared his throat. He picked up the paper, pretending to read it, though we all knew he had memorized every word the day he stole it. "Yes, I recognize it. You were named as the temporary executor of your late father's estate, correct?" "Yes." "And you understood that this specific trust account holding $200,000 was designated exclusively for the benefit of your daughter, Marisa Garcia." Victor shifted in his heavy leather chair. He adjusted his tie. He glanced at his lawyer. Davis gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod, signaling him to stick to the script they had rehearsed. "I understood I was supposed to manage the funds for her benefit," Victor answered. He puffed his chest out slightly, trying to summon the old patriarchal authority. Marisa was young. She did not understand money. As her father, I made the executive decision to utilize those funds to cover the extensive costs of her upbringing and her ongoing family obligations. He delivered the lie with a straight face. He wanted the official court transcript to reflect the image of a burdened, responsible father doing his best to care for an ungrateful child. He expected me to interrupt. He expected me to shout that I had been paying my own rent since I was 22. I did not say a word. I let him dig the hole. Brenda did not argue with his narrative. She simply turned to the next page in her binder. She pulled out a stack of bank ledgers obtained directly from his commercial lender during the forensic audit. She laid them out on the table, side by side, forming a clear, undeniable timeline of theft. "That is very interesting, Mr. Garcia," Brenda murmured. She tapped a manicured fingernail against the first ledger. "Because, according to these wire transfer logs, the money did not go toward your daughter's upbringing. On August 14th, exactly 2 weeks after your father's funeral, you wired $40,000 from the trust directly into the operating account for Garcia Hardware." Victor stared at the paper. The color began to drain from his cheeks. 3 days later, Brenda continued her voice ticking like a metronome. "You used those exact funds to pay a commercial lumber supplier in Detroit. On September 2nd, you wired another $60,000 from the trust to satisfy a defaulted business loan held by your hardware store. On November 10th, you diverted $25,000 to pay your store's commercial property taxes." Brenda leaned forward, resting her elbows on the oak table. She looked my father direct in the eye. "Tell me, Mr. Garcia, did your daughter's upbringing require wholesale industrial lumber? Did she request that you pay your commercial property taxes out of her inheritance?" Victor opened his mouth, but only a dry rasp came out. He looked at Davis. His lawyer stared at the ledgers on the table. Davis closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. A defense attorney can spin a bad decision. A defense attorney cannot spin an explicit paper trail of grand larceny. "It was a loan." Victor stammered, his confident posture collapsing inward. "The business was struggling. I intended to pay it back. I am the head of the family. The family business supports all of us." "Did you ask the beneficiary for a loan?" Brenda asked, her tone razor sharp. "Did you secure a promissory note? Did you draft a repayment schedule?" "No," Victor whispered. "Then it was not a loan," Brenda stated for the record. "It was theft." The silence in the conference room was heavy, suffocating. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic clicking of the court reporter striking her keys, carving my father's confession into permanent legal history. But Brenda was not finished. A skilled litigator does not just dismantle the primary target, she destabilizes the entire defense. Brenda turned her gaze away from Victor and focused entirely on my mother. Sylvia had been sitting rigidly in her chair, clutching her designer handbag in her lap. She wore her best silk blouse, trying to project an air of upper-middle-class dignity. She thought she was just there for moral support. She was wrong. "Mrs. Garcia," Brenda said, pulling a new document from her binder, "let us talk about your youngest daughter, Jolene, specifically her luxury apartment at the Grand River Lofts." Sylvia stiffened. Her eyes darted toward the door. Brenda slid the forged lease agreement across the table. She placed the printout of the expired notary commission right next to it. "We have established that your husband drained your eldest daughter's trust to save his failing business," Brenda said. "But this document tells a different story. This document shows Marissa's signature acting as a primary guarantor for an apartment she has never visited. The signature is a forgery. The notary stamp belongs to Arthur Vance, whose commission expired 4 years prior to this date." Sylvia swallowed hard. "I do not know anything about that. Victor handles the paperwork." Brenda smiled, a tight, surgical expression. "That is fascinating, Mrs. Garcia. Because the property management company provided us with the email thread containing the lease application, the application was submitted from your personal email address. The forged documents were attached to a message bearing your digital signature." Sylvia stopped breathing. "Identity theft is a severe offense." Brenda continued, lowering her voice until it was a lethal whisper. "Wire fraud carries mandatory minimum sentencing. When we submit this evidence to the district attorney, they will not just look at your husband. They will look at the person who transmitted the fraudulent documents across state lines." My mother looked down at the forged lease. She looked at the expired notary stamp. She realized in that freezing room that her social status, her church group, and her carefully curated public image could not shield her from a felony indictment. If you have ever watched a toxic system collapse, you know that loyalty is an illusion. Toxic people do not protect each other. They use each other as human shields the moment the bullets start flying. Sylvia's self-preservation instinct engaged. She let go of her designer handbag. She placed both hands flat on the oak table. She did not perform her usual theatrical cry. This was raw, unfiltered panic. She looked at Brenda, ignoring her own defense attorney. "I did not forge anything," Sylvia gasped, the tears spilling over her eyelashes. "He did it." She pointed a shaking finger directly at my father's chest. Victor jerked back in his chair as if she had stabbed him. "Sylvia, shut your mouth." "I will not go to jail for you," Sylvia sobbed, her voice rising in hysterics. She looked back at Brenda, desperate to save herself. He brought the papers to the kitchen table. He practiced tracing Marissa's name on a legal pad for an hour. He took Arthur's old notary stamp from the hardware store office, and he made me email the file to the leasing agent. He said if I did not do it, Jolene would be homeless and the wedding would be ruined. He forced me to participate. Sylvia. Victor roared. He surged upward, half rising out of his heavy leather chair. His face turned a dark, dangerous shade of crimson. "Mr. Garcia, sit down immediately," Davis snapped, grabbing his client by the forearm and hauling him back into his seat. But Victor was beyond legal counsel. The betrayal broke the last remaining thread of his sanity. The wife who had supported his abuse for decades, the woman who had stood on my porch and begged me to drop the charges because blood is blood, had just sold him to the prosecution to save her own skin. "You traitor," Victor screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I did everything for this family. I kept a roof over your head. I paid for your clothes. I paid for Jolene's life. You sat there and spent the money right beside me. You knew exactly where the cash came from, and you never complained once." The court reporter did not flinch. Her hands flew across the steno machine, capturing every venomous, incriminating word. My father was confessing to systemic fraud on the official record simply because he wanted to make sure my mother went down with the ship. I sat back in my chair and watched them. I drank my ice water. I felt a profound, untroubled calm. A month ago, they sat across from me at a steakhouse and laughed. My father told me I was excluded from the vacation. He told me I was not part of the family. Now I watched them tear each other to shreds under fluorescent lights. They were proving what I had slowly come to realize. They were never a family. They were a hostage situation, disguised with holiday dinners and sentimental language. The moment the money ran out, the moment the lies were exposed, the entire facade burned to the ground. Mr. Davis stood up. He slammed his notepad shut with a loud, echoing crack. "This deposition is over," Davis announced, his voice tight with extreme professional distress. He glared at his clients, thoroughly disgusted by their behavior. "I am advising my clients to invoke their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination." Brenda did not argue. She closed her black binder. "We have everything we need, Mr. Davis." Davis leaned across the table toward Brenda. He kept his voice low, shutting my screaming parents out of the conversation. "Ms. Sterling, my clients are facing insurmountable liability here. We need to halt the formal filing of these transcripts. I am officially requesting an immediate private settlement conference. We are prepared to concede to your terms." Brenda looked at me. I gave her a single, slow nod. The defense had collapsed. The united front was destroyed. Victor's fate was sealed. All that remained was the final calculation of his ruin. 2 weeks after the deposition fractured my family into bitter fragments, we gathered in a courtroom in downtown Grand Rapids. The air conditioning hummed a low mechanical drone that filled the heavy quiet before the judge arrived. This was not a trial. A trial requires a defense. When a man confesses to grand larceny on the official record just to ensure his wife faces felony charges alongside him, a trial is no longer an option. Victor's attorney had begged for this mandatory settlement hearing. He wanted to stop the bleeding. He wanted to negotiate a payment plan and keep the wreckage private. He still believed my father possessed some kind of leverage. I sat beside Brenda Sterling at the plaintiff's table. I wore a tailored navy suit and kept my hands folded, resting on top of a single manila folder. I felt a profound sense of stillness. Across the aisle, the Garcia family sat shoulder to shoulder, though they looked miles apart. Victor stared blankly at the polished wooden table. His custom suit hung loosely on his frame, the fabric bagging around his shoulders. The confident patriarch who had laughed at me over a steak dinner was gone. In his place sat a hollow, gray-faced man who had finally run out of lies to spend. Sylvia sat as far from him as the chair would allow. She clutched her designer handbag against her chest like a shield. She refused to look at her husband. She refused to look at me. Behind them, in the gallery, sat Jolene. She wore sunglasses indoors, her bare left hand resting on her knee. Without her wealthy fiancé and her luxury condo, my sister looked remarkably ordinary. She glared at the back of my head, her posture rigid with a fury she could no longer afford to express. The heavy wooden door beside the bench swung open. The bailiff instructed us to rise. Judge Harrison took his seat. He was an older man with sharp eyes and a reputation for possessing zero tolerance for financial predators. Judge Harrison opened the thick binder Brenda had submitted to the court. The quiet in the room stretched out measured by the crisp turning of pages. The judge read the forensic audit. He read the bank transfer logs. He read the sworn deposition transcripts where my parents turned on each other. He did not look up for a long time. When he finally closed the binder, the snap of the cardboard rings echoed like a gunshot. Mr. Garcia, Judge Harrison began, his voice dropping like a heavy stone. I have presided over this court for 22 years. I have seen business partners embezzle funds. I have seen siblings fight over estates. But the systematic, calculated theft of a child's inheritance by her own father is a specific kind of betrayal that offends the basic principles of human decency. Victor swallowed hard. He did not speak. His attorney placed a hand on his arm, urging him to remain silent. You were entrusted with $200,000 designated for your daughter's future. The judge continued his gaze, pinning my father to his chair. Instead of honoring your fiduciary duty, you treated that trust as a personal slush fund for a failing business. You forged documents. Your wife facilitated identity theft. You utilized your eldest daughter as a financial shield while deceiving her at every turn. Sylvia squeezed her eyes shut. A single tear escaped, cutting a path through her carefully applied makeup. The plaintiff has presented undisputed evidence, Judge Harrison stated, picking up his pen. Therefore, I am ordering full and immediate restitution. Victor Garcia is hereby ordered to repay the principal amount of $200,000 to Maurisa Garcia. The judge paused, looking directly at the defense table. Furthermore, given the egregious nature of the fraud and the deliberate concealment of assets, I am awarding the plaintiff full coverage of all legal fees plus punitive damages in the amount of $100,000. The total judgment stands at $375,000, payable immediately. A sharp gasp escaped Sylvia's throat. Your Honor, Victor's attorney stood up, his voice tight with professional desperation. My client's business accounts have been frozen by his commercial lender. The hardware store is currently entering bankruptcy proceedings. He does not possess the liquid capital to satisfy a judgment of this magnitude. We ask the court to consider a structured payment arrangement. Brenda Sterling stood smoothly. Your Honor, the plaintiff opposes any structured payment plan. The defendant has a documented history of hiding assets and funneling money through shell corporations. We ask the court to look at the defendant's unencumbered assets. Judge Harrison nodded. Mr. Garcia owns a residential property free and clear. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Brenda replied. The Garcia family home is fully paid off. It is the only remaining asset of sufficient value to satisfy this court order. The room seemed to lose all its oxygen. I watched the realization hit my parents. They had spent decades building an illusion of wealth. They had judged their friends, their neighbors, and their own daughter based on zip codes and square footage. The house was the final prop, keeping their stage intact. The court finds that the defendant lacks the liquid assets to satisfy this judgment. Judge Harrison ruled, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Therefore, I am ordering the immediate liquidation of the residential property owned by Victor and Sylvia Garcia. The house will be placed into receivership and sold at public auction. The proceeds will first satisfy the judgment owed to the plaintiff. Any remaining funds will be dispersed to the defendants. The scream tore through the courtroom. It was raw, jagged, and stripped of all theatrical polish. Sylvia leaped to her feet, dropping her handbag onto the floor. "You cannot take my house," Sylvia wailed, gripping the edge of the defense table. "Where will we live? We have nowhere to go. You are making us homeless." "Ma'am, sit down," immediately the bailiff warned, stepping forward. Sylvia ignored him, turning her frantic eyes toward me. "Marisa, tell him to stop. You cannot do this to your mother. We are your family." I looked at her. I felt no urge to comfort her. I felt no urge to apologize. I simply watched a woman facing the exact level of ruin she had tried to hand me when she let her husband forge my name on an eviction notice. Before I could respond, a second voice erupted from the gallery. "This is her fault." Jolene surged forward, pushing past the wooden swinging gate that separated the gallery from the courtwell. She pointed a trembling finger at my face. "She planned this because she is jealous. She ruined my wedding, and now she is stealing my parents' house. Make her stop." Judge Harrison slammed his gavel down. The sharp wooden crack silenced the room instantly. "Bailiff, remove that young woman from my courtroom," the judge ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "One more outburst from the defense table, and I will hold you both in contempt." The bailiff grabbed Jolene by the arm and marched her toward the heavy double doors. She dragged her feet, looking over her shoulder at our parents, expecting them to save her. Victor did not even turn his head. He sat in stunned, hollow silence, staring at the grain of the wooden table. Sylvia sank slowly back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook as the reality of her new life settled over her. There would be no more dinner parties. There would be no more country club gossip. There would only be moving boxes and the undeniable public knowledge of what they had done. "This hearing is adjourned," Judge Harrison announced. He stepped down from the bench. The court reporter packed up her machine. The heavy gears of the legal system finished grinding, leaving a clean, balanced ledger in their wake. I gathered my folder and stood up. Brenda offered a quiet, satisfied nod and headed toward the clerk to collect the signed orders. I buttoned my coat and turned to walk down the center aisle. Victor stood up from the defense table. He stepped into the aisle, blocking my path. He looked terrible, aged beyond his years, his eyes red and sunken. The anger he usually wore like armor had been replaced by a toxic, festering bitterness. He leaned close to me. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You destroyed us," he hissed, the words dripping with pure, concentrated hatred. I stopped. I did not step back. I did not shrink away from his anger. I stood my ground and looked at the man who had treated my life like a disposable resource for 3 decades. I adjusted the lapel of my coat, entirely unbothered by his rage. "I just audited the accounts," I replied calmly. "You destroyed yourselves." I stepped around him. I walked past my weeping mother. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the long marble hallway. I took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out through the glass doors of the courthouse. The Michigan sunshine hit my face bright and crisp. The air smelled like pine trees and cold pavement. I stood on the concrete steps and took a deep, full breath. I waited for the guilt to arrive. Society conditions you to believe that walking away from your bloodline will leave you fractured and incomplete. I waited for the sadness, the regret, the sudden urge to turn back and fix their broken lives. None of it came. Instead, I felt a profound physical lightness. The tension that had lived in my shoulders since childhood dissolved into the crisp afternoon air. The financial chains that had tied me to their abuse were completely severed. I was no longer the family ATM. I was no longer the invisible workhorse. I was finally, entirely, my own woman. But a collapse of this magnitude does not happen in a vacuum. A family obsessed with appearances cannot hide an auction sign on their front lawn. The legal battle was over, but the social reckoning was just beginning, and the community that had worshipped my parents was about to learn exactly who they really were. A judge striking a wooden gavel finalizes a financial ruin, but a family standing in a crowded room finalizes a social one. Court documents only dictate who owes the money. The real verdict is always delivered at a dinner table. 3 weeks after the judge ordered the auction of my parents' home, the annual regional charity gala took place in Ann Arbor. For over a decade, this specific banquet served as the premier social event for our extended family network. Aunts, uncles, second cousins, and local business owners gathered in a grand hotel ballroom to donate to pediatric research and, more importantly, to observe one another. In previous years, my parents treated this night as their personal coronation. Victor would wear a custom tuxedo and shake hands with local politicians. Sylvia would float between tables in imported silk, boasting about Jolene's latest pageant, her flawless apartment, or her wealthy fiancé. I was usually seated near the kitchen doors, wearing a dress from a clearance rack, hoping nobody would ask me questions I did not want to answer. This year, I did not buy my outfit from a discount rack. I went to a boutique in downtown Grand Rapids and purchased a tailored emerald green evening gown. It fit perfectly. I paired it with simple gold jewelry and the quiet, steady posture of a woman who no longer carried the weight of her family's lies. I paid for all of it using funds from my own compliance manager's salary. I handed my keys to the valet outside the Grand Hotel. The evening air carried a crisp, sharp chill. I walked up the marble steps and pushed through the heavy revolving doors. The banquet hall hummed with the sound of 300 guests. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in heavy white linen. Waiters in dark vests carried silver trays of champagne. I stepped into the room, and the social physics shifted almost instantly. Court records are public documents. In a community woven tightly together by gossip and shared history, a judgment for fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny does not stay hidden. The details of the lawsuit, the frozen hardware store accounts, and the impending auction of the Garcia family home had circulated through the extended family network faster than a winter flu. I walked toward my assigned table. I saw Aunt Clara standing near the carving station. Just weeks ago, Clara had sent me a text message questioning my mental health, accusing me of stealing my parents' savings. When Clara saw me approaching, the color drained from her face. She dropped her gaze to the floor, suddenly finding the pattern of the carpet fascinating. I did not ignore her. I stopped, offered a polite, level smile, and said a simple, "Good evening." Clara stammered, her cheeks burning dark red. She muttered a rushed greeting and hurried away toward the restrooms. Cousin Mark, who had called me sick and ungrateful, stood near the bar. When our eyes met, he physically turned his body in the opposite direction, pretending to study the cocktail menu. They could not look at me. The undeniable, documented truth of my grandfather's stolen trust stripped them of their self-righteousness. Their shame was a heavy, suffocating blanket, and I let them wear it. 10 minutes before the first course arrived, Victor and Sylvia walked into the ballroom. They arrived late on purpose, attempting to execute their usual grand entrance. They wanted the room to believe they were still the successful, generous patriarch and matriarch of the Garcia family. They wanted to project resilience, to pretend the lawsuit was just a private misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But a ruined facade is impossible to hide. Victor wore the same tuxedo he had worn for the past 5 years, but it hung loosely on his shoulders, emphasizing the weight he had lost from stress. Sylvia wore a forced, brittle smile that looked like it caused her physical pain. Trailing behind them was Jolene. The golden child looked unrecognizable. She wore a black dress that seemed 2 seasons old. She kept her head bowed, her shoulders hunched forward, trying to shrink into her own shadow. Her left hand gripped her evening bag, the ring finger glaringly bare. Derek had kept his word. The wedding was canceled, the venue deposits were pulled, and Jolene was facing her reality without a safety net. They navigated toward our family section. As they moved through the tables, the room reacted. People did not greet them. Conversations halted as they passed and resumed in hushed, urgent whispers the moment their backs were turned. The wealthy business owners Victor used to court suddenly found themselves deeply engaged in discussions with their spouses. They reached our table. I sat, taking a sip of sparkling water. Victor stopped when he saw me. A flash of pure venom crossed his tired eyes, but he quickly masked it, remembering the hundreds of witnesses surrounding us. He pulled out a chair for Sylvia, then sat down at the opposite end of the table from me. Jolene took a seat, staring down at her empty porcelain plate. The first course arrived. The tension at our specific table was thick enough to crack a tooth. No one spoke. The aunts and uncles seated with us focused intensely on their salads. The silence was deafening, a profound rejection of the dynamic Victor had spent decades enforcing. Victor could not tolerate the quiet. His entire identity relied on controlling the narrative. He needed to prove he still commanded respect. He needed an audience to validate his existence. When the main course was cleared and the coffee was poured, Victor reached for his water goblet. He picked up a silver spoon and tapped the glass. The sharp clinking sound cut through the low murmur of the nearby tables. Several guests turned to look. Victor stood up, buttoning his jacket, projecting the illusion of a man who still held the reins of his empire. I want to take a brief moment. Victor began pitching his voice loud enough for the adjacent tables to hear clearly. I want to thank everyone for gathering tonight. Family is the foundation of our lives. We have faced some significant trials recently. The business climate has been unforgiving, and miscommunications have tested our bonds. He smiled a tight, artificial expression. But the Garcia family has always been resilient. We overcome our hurdles through unity, through forgiveness, and through our unwavering commitment to one another. I raise my glass to family, to moving forward and to leaving the past behind us. He held his goblet high, waiting for the table to echo his toast. He waited for his siblings, his nieces, and his nephews to raise their glasses and validate his delusion. No one moved. The silence stretched out fragile and razor-thin. Then a chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Uncle Mateo Jr. stood up. Mateo was Victor's older brother, the other son of grandfather Tomas. Mateo lived a quiet life, managing a regional logistics firm. He rarely raised his voice, preferring to observe rather than participate in family drama. But he had read the public court filings. He knew exactly where his father's trust money had gone. Mateo did not pick up his glass. He stood tall, looking directly at Victor across the white linen. "Put your glass down," Victor Mateo said. His tone held no anger, only a cold, devastating authority. Victor froze, his arms still raised in the air. "Mateo, this is a toast to our family." "We are not toasting you tonight," Mateo replied, his voice carrying clearly over the silent tables. "You do not get to speak about family unity. You do not get to preach about forgiveness." Mateo placed both of his hands flat on the table, leaning forward. "Our father set aside a trust to protect Maurisa," Mateo continued, every word landing like a physical blow. "He knew she would need it because he knew exactly what kind of man you were. You stole from a dead man to cover your own failures. You forged documents to steal your own daughter's identity." Sylvia let out a small, terrified gasp, pressing a napkin to her mouth. "You disgraced our father's name," Mateo stated, stripping away the last remaining shred of Victor's pride. "I will not drink with a man who robs his own blood to pay his debts. You are no longer the head of this family. Do not ask us to pretend otherwise." Mateo sat back down. He picked up his napkin, placed it on his lap, and looked away. The execution was swift and total. The surrounding tables had heard every word. The public shunning was immediate. The relatives seated at our table slowly, deliberately shifted their chairs, turning their shoulders away from Victor and Sylvia. It was a silent, unified rejection. Victor stood holding his water goblet. His face turned the color of wet ash. The realization washed over him, brutal and undeniable. The money was gone. The house was gone. The hardware store was gone. And now the social standing he had sacrificed his own daughter to protect was dead. He slowly lowered his arm. He set the glass down. He sank into his chair, a ruined, isolated man. Beside him, Sylvia stared straight ahead, tears welling in her eyes, finally understanding the true cost of her enabling. Jolene closed her eyes, hiding her face behind her hair. I sat at the opposite end of the table. I did not smile. I did not offer a smug remark. Gloating is a weapon for people who still need to prove they have won. I had nothing left to prove. I picked up my fork. I took a bite of my dinner. I enjoyed the flavor of the roasted vegetables and the prime rib. I engaged in a warm, pleasant conversation with Uncle Mateo about his recent fishing trip to the Upper Peninsula. When dessert was served, I dabbed my mouth with my napkin and stood up. I thanked Uncle Mateo for his company. I offered polite farewells to the few relatives who had offered me a kind nod. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at my sister. I walked out of the banquet hall. The night air greeted me sharp and refreshing. I handed my ticket to the valet, tipped him well, and drove my car back toward Grand Rapids. The dark highway stretched out before me, quiet and open. I was driving toward a life that belonged solely to me. But a toxic system always makes one final, desperate attempt to drag you back into the mud. And my mother was about to send a letter that would test the very boundary I had just built. 3 months pass. The legal system operates at a glacial pace, but bank transfers happen in a fraction of a second. On a Tuesday morning in late October, my phone vibrated on my office desk. I opened my banking application. A pending wire transfer sat at the top of the ledger. $200,000 in principal, plus the mandated legal fees and punitive damages. The sale of the Garcia family home had officially closed. The money did not bring me sudden euphoria. It brought me equilibrium. In financial compliance, a balanced ledger is the only truth that matters. The debt was settled, and the people who tried to ruin me were finally forced to pay the invoice. The proceeds from the auction barely covered the court judgment and the remaining mortgage on their property. Victor and Sylvia walked away with nothing but pocket change and shattered pride. They packed 30 years of curated wealth into a rented moving truck and drove east toward the outskirts of Detroit. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a cinder block complex situated right next to a noisy interstate. The walls were paper thin. The carpets smelled like industrial cleaner. Victor had spent his entire adulthood playing the wealthy patriarch. He loved the performance of power. Now he had to pay rent on the first of every month. At 60 years old, my father applied for a job. He did not secure a corner office. He was hired as an early morning shift manager at a massive corporate hardware chain. A man who used to own his own store now wore a bright orange polyester vest and a plastic name tag. He clocked in at 5 a.m. to organize shelves of discounted drill bits. He took direct orders from a regional director who was barely 26 years old. Every time a customer complained about a missing price tag, Victor had to stand there, nod respectfully, and apologize. His ego, the very thing that made him steal my inheritance to save face, was dismantled 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, under harsh, fluorescent retail lights. Jolene occupied the second bedroom in that tiny apartment. Her luxury downtown condo was gone. Derek was gone. The lavish 300-person wedding was a ghost. My sister possessed no college degree and no marketable skills. She secured the only employment she could find. She folded sweaters at a fast fashion retail store inside a dying suburban mall. She spent her days steaming knit shirts and returning discarded clothes to their proper hangers. Her manager constantly scolded her for checking her phone. She spent her shifts standing behind a cash register, swiping barcodes, and handing shopping bags to women wearing the exact carat-sized diamond she had been forced to return. At night, Jolene drove her beat-up used sedan back to the apartment. The dynamic inside those thin walls turned completely toxic. Victor blamed Sylvia for turning on him during the deposition. Sylvia blamed Victor for forging the legal documents. Jolene blamed both of them for destroying her future. They spent their evenings trapped in a cycle of bitter accusations, shouting at each other over the roar of the highway traffic outside their single-pane windows. They had nobody left to use as a scapegoat. The The mirror was finally facing inward, and none of them liked the reflection. I knew none of this through direct contact. I learned the details from Aunt Clara, who called me once to pass along the family gossip before I politely asked her to stop sharing their updates. I did not want to monitor their ruin. I wanted to move forward. But toxic patterns possess a terrifying inertia. People who rely on manipulation will always try to pick the lock on a closed door. The attempt arrived on a cold Friday afternoon in November. I walked down my driveway to check the mail. Mixed between a water bill and a grocery circular was a plain white envelope. The return address printed in the top left corner listed the Detroit apartment complex. The handwriting belonged to my mother. The cursive was shaky, rushed, lacking the deliberate elegance she used to project. I stood in my driveway, the cold Michigan wind biting through my wool coat, and stared at her handwriting. A year ago, an envelope from Sylvia would have triggered a massive spike of anxiety. I would have opened it immediately, bracing for an insult or a financial demand. Now, I just felt a profound, heavy fatigue. I walked inside, set my keys on the granite counter, and used a kitchen knife to slice the envelope open. A single sheet of lined notebook paper slid out. It was written on both sides. I unfolded it and read the first paragraph. Marissa, the letter began. I know you are angry. I know we made mistakes. But the temperature dropped below freezing last night and the heating unit in this apartment is broken. The property manager refuses to fix it until we pay a penalty fee we cannot afford. Your father is working so hard, but his back is failing him. Jolene cries every night. We are your family. Blood requires forgiveness. We are begging you to find it in your heart to help us, just this once. I stopped reading. My eyes scanned the blue ink, registering the exact mechanics of her guilt trip. She did not take accountability for the forgery. She did not mention the stolen trust fund. She weaponized the cold weather and her husband's failing health to extract cash. She used the word blood to demand an unearned rescue. She wanted me to read the second page, where I knew she would list a specific dollar amount and provide a routing number. She still believed I was the family utility closet, waiting to be opened the second a pipe burst. I did not flip the page over. I did not need to see the dollar sign. I walked over to my home office desk. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a thick red marker. I placed the letter back inside the white envelope. I smoothed the paper flat against the wood. I uncapped the marker and wrote 3 words in bold block letters across the front of the envelope, right over her shaky cursive. Return to sender. I walked straight back out my front door, marched down the concrete driveway, and dropped the envelope into the outgoing mail slot. The metal lid clanked shut. The sound was sharp and definitive. I returned to my kitchen. I picked up my cell phone. I navigated to my contact list. I found my father's number. I clicked block. I found my mother's number. I clicked block. I found Jolene's number. I clicked block. I opened my email client and created a permanent filter routing any messages from their addresses directly into the trash folder. Then I drafted a brief email to Brenda Sterling. Brenda, please draft a formal cease and desist letter. Send it via certified mail to the Detroit address I am attaching below. Instruct them that any further contact, written, digital, or physical, will be treated as harassment and forwarded to local law enforcement. Bill my account for your time. I pressed send. I set the phone down on the counter. The house was remarkably quiet. The furnace hummed a low, steady rhythm, pushing warm air through the vents. The refrigerator kicked on. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches of the oak tree in my front yard. Society conditions daughters to believe that cutting ties with their parents will result in a crushing, unendurable loneliness. We are taught that walking away from blood guarantees a lifetime of regret. We are told the silence will echo and haunt our sleep. I stood in my warm, quiet kitchen, pouring myself a glass of cold water. I took a slow sip. I listened to the silence. It did not sound lonely. It did not sound like grief. It did not sound like a tragedy. It sounded like absolute, unshakable peace. I had paid my dues. I had audited the ledger. The account was permanently closed. I would never be their safety net again. The legal system measures justice in court orders and financial restitution. But real peace is measured in the quiet moments that follow the storm. When the dust settled and the bank transfers cleared, I found myself holding the future my grandfather had always intended for me. The stolen trust money was returned, the legal fees were paid, the ledger was finally balanced. But living in Grand Rapids still felt like living inside a ghost of my past. Every street corner reminded me of an errand I had run for my parents, or a bill I had paid to keep their fictional empire afloat. I decided to leave the ghosts behind. I resigned from my firm, packed my belongings, and drove north. I used a portion of my recovered inheritance to purchase a house in Traverse City. I did not buy a sprawling, ostentatious mansion to prove a point. I bought a quiet, mid-century lake house hidden at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by towering pine trees and the clear, cold water of Lake Michigan. The closing process was a profound experience. I sat at a polished mahogany table in a real estate office and read every single page of the deed. I looked at the signature line. There were no forged guarantees. There were no fake notary stamps provided by corrupt business partners. There was only my name, Marisa Garcia, printed clean and true. I signed the paperwork with my own pen. I bought the house outright. It belonged to me, untouched by my family's memories, shielded from their greed, and protected by my own boundaries. The first few months in Traverse City were a revelation. I spent my mornings drinking black tea on the back deck, watching the fog roll off the water. I listened to the wind move through the pine branches. The silence was not lonely. It was a rich, heavy blanket of security. No one called me to demand a credit card number. No one texted me to complain about an overdue utility bill. I secured a new position working as a remote compliance auditor for a national firm, earning a higher salary than before, and I did my job looking out at the lake. As winter turned to spring, the calendar on my desk brought a familiar date into focus. I was turning 33. In my family, birthdays were transactional. If you were Jolene, a birthday meant a lavish dinner funded by someone else's paycheck. If you were me, a birthday meant buying your own marked-down grocery store cake and eating it in silence so you did not disturb the peace. I decided 33 was going to break the cycle. I was not going to wait for anyone else to celebrate my existence. I opened my laptop on a Tuesday evening. The irony of the timing was deliberate. I navigated to the exact luxury travel agency website my parents had used a year earlier. I selected the exact beachfront resort in Hawaii they had tried to steal using my joint savings account. I did not book a standard room. I upgraded to the panoramic ocean view suite on the top floor. I selected the premium private catamaran sunset tour Jolene had bragged about in the family group chat. I booked a first-class flight out of Detroit. When the payment screen loaded, I did not feel a single drop of anxiety. I typed in the numbers of my personal credit card. I clicked confirm. The screen flashed green. The itinerary dropped into my inbox. The trip was paid in full, funded by my own honest labor, and secured by my own name. The flight to Maui was effortless. I drank champagne in a wide leather seat while crossing the Pacific Ocean. I watched the clouds drift below the wing, feeling the last remnants of my Michigan childhood fall away. When I arrived at the resort, the warm, salt-tinged air wrapped around me like a greeting. A concierge placed a fresh flower lei around my neck and handed me the key card to the penthouse suite. I took the elevator to the top floor and opened the heavy wooden door. The suite was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling glass doors opened onto a massive private lanai. The sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore filled the room, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of pure power. I dropped my suitcase near the bed, walked out onto the balcony, and rested my hands on the glass railing. The sun was beginning to set over the water. The sky fractured into brilliant, saturated shades of gold burnt orange and deep violet. It was the exact view my father had laughed about at the steakhouse. It was the exact balcony my sister thought she would stand on while I stayed home working to pay her bills. I stood there in the warm breeze wearing a simple linen dress, and I soaked in the reality of my life. I had not won this view by stealing. I had not secured this balcony by forging signatures or betraying my blood. I had earned it by auditing the truth and refusing to shrink. I walked back into the suite and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I picked up my phone from the kitchen island to check the time. The screen lit up in my hand. A notification banner hovered near the top. It was a missed call from an unknown number with a Detroit area code. I stared at the screen. I knew my parents' numbers were blocked. I knew Jolene was blocked. But toxic people have a predictable playbook. When their access is revoked, they borrow phones. They buy burner numbers. They use cheap tricks to bypass the walls you build. A second notification popped up. The unknown number had left a voicemail. I held the phone in my palm. The old Marissa, the obedient workhorse who spent 20 years craving her father's approval, would have tapped the play button. She would have listened to the recording. She would have wanted to hear the defeat in Victor's voice or the desperate, manipulative sobbing in Sylvia's throat. She would have wanted proof that they finally realized what they had lost. I looked at the voicemail icon. I did not feel curiosity. I did not feel anger. I felt nothing at all. Their regret was not my responsibility. Their ruin was not my burden to carry. If they were calling to apologize, the apology was 20 years too late. If they were calling to beg for money because Victor could not pay his rent on a shift manager's salary, the bank was permanently closed. I smiled. A genuine, unrestrained smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I tapped the screen. I swiped left on the voicemail. I hit the red trash can icon. I selected permanently delete. The message vanished into the digital void, unheard and entirely powerless. I set the phone back down on the marble counter. I walked out onto the lanai and let the final rays of the Hawaiian sun warm my face. Society tells a very specific lie about family. We are taught that blood is a permanent contract. We are told that you must endure endless disrespect, financial abuse, and cruelty simply because the people hurting you happen to share your last name. We are conditioned to believe that walking away from your parents makes you the villain of the story. I am here to tell you the truth. Blood dictates where you start your life. It does not dictate where you have to stay. You do not owe your future to people who treat your existence like a checking account. You are allowed to outgrow the family that refused to love you. You are allowed to audit the ledger, close the books, and build a house on a quiet lake where they are never invited. I took a deep, full breath of the ocean air. The waves crashed against the volcanic rocks below. I was 33 years old. I was safe. I was successful. And for the first time in my entire life, I was completely free. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story resonated with you, if you have ever had to build an unbreakable boundary to protect your own peace, please drop a comment below and share your experience. I read every single one. Hit the like button to support the channel, and make sure you are subscribed so you never miss another story about finding your courage. Your worth is determined by what you build with your own hands, not by the people who failed to see it. Until next time, take care of your peace.